Chapter 162. The next morning, in the valley. Other than those who liked to wander around at night, the civilians were always the first to wake up. However, when the members of the Gray Coat Army woke up to train, they found that someone had already woken up before them. Well, the wooden signs on the roadside every 100 meters could prove it. When did this appear? There are words on it. What does it say? Obviously, not all the civilians could read. Let me see. A young man squeezed in and glanced at the wooden sign. What's wrong? Hurry up and read it. Well, do you want to steal important information from a heavily guarded place? Do you want to take the head of the enemy's commander in the midst of thousands of soldiers? Do you want to be a night specter that will strike fear into the hearts of your enemies? Do you want to be a hero that will be admired by everyone? Come, Leader Rose's new gray space welcomes you. Here, you can do all of the above and gain glory. Registration address, open space in the west of the valley. Places are limited. Hurry up if you want to register. Everyone looked at each other, stunned by the words on the wooden sign. Boss, Tang set up the table and sat down. The words on the wooden sign. Can we do it? David put a wooden sign on the table and asked hesitantly. How would I know? Tang nonchalantly adjusted the small sign with the gray space sign up area written on it. David and Michaud were a little confused. It's an advertisement. If you don't make it sound cool. Okay, when someone comes, David, you'll be in charge of arm wrestling. Michaud, you'll be in charge of speed testing. Well, don't go all out. Okay. After the conversation with Leader Rosa last night, Tang was finally allowed to establish his own team. It was a taboo to let a newcomer gather strength. Tang knew that this should be the reward for his previous series of contributions. As for Rosa saying that the team would be directly under her, on one hand, it was to give Tang face. On the other hand, she wanted to control the team. Originally, the members of this team were assigned directly. They were all transferred from the scout team. However, Tang refused. What he needed was not an excellent scout, but a blank piece of paper that he had instilled with the killer's consciousness. It had to be said that this novel advertising model attracted a lot of people. Gradually, some people walked to the wooden table. Of course, Tang didn't accept just anyone. Those who had the advantage in strength could go to arm wrestle with David, and those who had the advantage in speed could go to Michaud. If it was someone with other specialties, they could look for him directly. Old Guan once said that as long as there was no problem with one's mental fortitude, any talented person could become a qualified assassin after training. David was having a good time, and the sound of his arms pressing on the table could be heard. Of course, he won every single time. Through the old butler's scientific training method, his strength talent was constantly expanding. Michaud was testing his hand speed and reflexes. The method was very simple. It was to place a fruit on the table, and whoever got it would be the winner. After a few rounds of testing, Tang was slightly disappointed, but this was within his expectations. Most of the members of the Gray Coat Army were poor. They had never come into contact with battle energy, and their fighting style was relatively primitive. Some of the talented ones had been recruited by other combat units, and those who had come to take the test now were almost all sallow and emaciated people. Finally, a young man hesitantly walked up to Tang. From his red palms, it was clear that he had already taken the first 2 tests. Needless to say, the results were naturally failures. Welcome, please sit down. I'm Tang. How should I address you? Look, why do you want to join the Gray Space? Well, I joined the scout team, but they didn't want me. Did he have to be so frank? Tang rubbed his nose. Why? There has to be a reason why they didn't want you to join, right? Luke hesitated for a moment. I don't have a good sense of direction. I don't remember the way. Tang rubbed his forehead. How dare you join the scout team with a poor sense of direction? It would be a miracle if they wanted you, but I have a specialty. I'm very accurate when it comes to throwing things. Really, I used to herd sheep when I was a kid. Whenever a sheep ran out, I could throw it back. I really want to join the army to kill enemies." Seeing Tang En's expression, Luke knew that there was no hope for him to join. He couldn't help but feel anxious, and quickly spilled the beans on his specialty. "Accurate when it comes to throwing things," Tang En muttered thoughtfully, then bent down to pick up 2 stones from the ground. "I'll throw 1 stone out later and you'll throw the other one. If you hit it, I'll let you join. How does that sound?" Okay. Luke nodded repeatedly, looking very confident. "Watch carefully." Tang En suddenly threw out a stone. Swoosh! The stone flew into the air at a visible speed. Luke gripped the stone tightly in his hand and stared fixedly at the sky. When the stone reached the top, it paused for a moment. Bang! In an instant, one of the stones hit him first. "Haha, I did it! Luke jumped up, his face red as he danced around. "Luke, welcome to the gray space. Well, I'll get you a bow and a set of throwing knives. You can practice with them in the future." After opening the door, people started to pass the test one after another. After all, Tang En didn't have high requirements. As long as someone was a bit special, they could join. In one morning, the gray space recruited 14 people. "What's your specialty?" "I keep track of things and calculate." Wait. Tang En's expression changed, and he quickly said to the person next to him, "David, if someone comes looking for me later, tell them that I'm not here." After that, he crouched down and instantly hid under the table. In an instant, Josiah, who was biting his lip, and a young man in gray walked over with an embarrassed expression. Turning his head and looking around, Joshua asked with a sullen expression, "David, where's Dunn?" David scratched his head and said, "Boss said that he's not here." Michaud lowered his head. Bang! The table suddenly shook. Then, Tang En, with one hand on his forehead and the other on his nose, stood up from under the table. Josiah pouted and said, "Tang, who said that I'm not here, David? You're usually honest. Why are you lying today?" Tang En said first. No." David looked a little aggrieved, but Michaud quickly covered his mouth. "Hey, it's Josiah. Why are you looking for me?" "Oh right. I was just about to ask you for help," Tang En said seriously with a surprised expression. "Ask me for help?" Josiah blinked, a little confused. "Yes, sit down." Tang En pulled over a chair and said, "You know, I've always wanted to form a team. Now I need all kinds of talents. You're a magician. Sit here and let me test you to see if there's anyone here who's talented." Josiah nodded and sat behind the table. Tang En wiped the sweat off his forehead. "Damn, I'll live my life by relying on reaction time." Suddenly, "Brother Tang, why did you lie to me?" The young man in gray next to him spread out his hands, his face full of resentment. "By the way, I almost forgot. Tang, how can you let people call me a beauty? Am I that narcissistic?" Josiah came back to his senses and looked up at Tang En. This. Hey, the weather is good today. Ha ha. To be continued. If you like this work, you're welcome to come to Chidien. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 163. The recruitment process lasted for a whole day, and in the end, a total of 33 people were selected. This could be regarded as the tallest among the shorties, so none of them were more talented than David and Michaud. In addition, inviting Josiah to take the test was purely an accident, so there was no surprise in the end. Even so, Tang En was very satisfied with the result. These people were almost like blank pieces of paper. As long as they persevered, Tang En was confident that he could train them. By the time the recruitment was over, it was almost evening. Tang En only told them to gather here at 5 o'clock in the morning and dismissed them on the spot. After that, he took David and Michaud straight to the equipment department of the Gray Coat Army. The Gray Coat Army had existed for many years, so naturally, The internal structure had been set up a long time ago. The leader was Lhasa, and under him were the publicity department, combat department, logistics department, equipment department, and so on. There were also some special departments like intelligence, treatment, and so on that were attached to each department. The efficiency of the work here was not slow, and Lhasa had already registered the Grey Coat Army last night. When Tang En found a person in charge of the equipment department and explained the purpose of his visit, the person readily agreed to his request. After coming out from here, Twain brought David and Michaud into the wooden house. After taking a few steps left and right and pondering for a while, Tang En raised his head and asked, "If there comes a day when you have great strength, what will you do?" "Very strong?" David touched his head and said decisively, "I don't know. This guy." Tang En thought of what had happened at noon, and couldn't help but itch. "Revenge," Michaud said without hesitation. "What happens after you get your revenge?" Tang En asked. Michaud's expression was also blank. "I don't know." Tang En smacked his lips. He realized that he had asked a stupid question. Who knows what will happen in the future? Shaking his head, he took out a book from his pocket. "In the future, in addition to practicing what I taught you during the day, practice this at night. Tide breathing method. What is it?" David took the book and looked at it carefully. Michaud, on the other hand, seemed to know something. He grabbed the book and quickly flipped through a few pages. Then, his hands began to tremble. His expression changed from ecstasy to hatred to reminiscence. All sorts of emotions flashed across his face, making him look somewhat ferocious. Michaud, who was bent on revenge, had a great desire for the Do Chi mantra. Tang En patted him on the shoulder, then took out 2 pieces of paper and handed them to each of them. What's this? Is it a map?" David looked at the circle and asked in confusion. "Damn it, I've been drawing for a long time." The corner of Tang En's mouth twitched twice. With a dark face he said, "The circle represents your upper torso. When you feel the Do Chi in your body, move it according to this circle until you feel the swelling pain. Remember, you must strictly follow the diagram. You can't make a single mistake, otherwise you will die." "Wow, it's so serious." David's hands trembled as he panicked. "It's possible that you'll suffer a fate worse than death. If you take the wrong path, I won't be able to save you." After pausing for a moment, Tang En continued solemnly, "Also, without my permission, this thing is absolutely not allowed to be spread. If you violate this, I will kill you with my own hands." At this point, as if a cold wind had entered the house, the temperature suddenly dropped. Both David and Michaud shuddered, then nodded in agreement. "Well, that's enough. You can go back and cultivate." Seeing David and Michaud leave the wooden house, Tang En sighed in his heart. He didn't know whether this was the right decision or not. It was imperative that the Gray Spaces team grow stronger. David and Michaud were the first to follow him, and they were the most talented. They would inevitably be his right-hand men in the future, so their strength naturally couldn't be too low. Tang En let out a long breath and entered the system space. It was useless to think too much about the future. Early in the morning, the sky was slightly bright. Tap, 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 huff, 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 speed up, maintain the rhythm of your breathing. Motherf asterisk cur, are you a turtle? Faster, faster, faster. Early in the morning, the Grey Coat Army was surprised to find dozens of people running out of the valley in the morning fog. Their figures were very bloated, and none of them were fast. There was also a figure with a wooden stick running behind them. Once someone slowed down, the wooden stick would hit them without hesitation. What are they doing? Are they practicing? The combatants of the Grey Coat Army also had military drills every morning, and most of the content was slashing and chopping. It should be. They seemed to be people from the Gray Space. Didn't they recruit all day yesterday? Why are they only here? Hey, they said it was a test. Those who don't pass can't enter. Isn't this a joke? What can these people do? Is that Luke, who's a road idiot? They want such a person? Hey, isn't that the fatty who always brags about how good he is at counting? Haha, this person recruited. Yeah, look at them. They don't even have the strength to run. They're very slow. Are they running with something on their backs? It's a rock. I saw them knock the rock into that strange bag this morning. It must be dozens of kilograms. Is it useful to train like this? Who knows? The team that caused a lot of discussion was indeed Tang En and his gray space members. Last night, Tang En had asked the equipment department to sew a kind of backpack. This thing was made of rough cloth and twine. It was ugly and had holes in its appearance. The only advantage was that it was sturdy and it was just right for carrying large rocks. Tang En was very proud of this invention, but the dozens of members obviously didn't think so. At this moment, they only felt like they were carrying a mountain on their backs. Their throats were about to smoke and their legs were as heavy as lead. Moreover, they couldn't be distracted at this time. If they were distracted, they might be knocked down by the backpack behind them. At that time, the wooden stick would follow them like a shadow. Torture. Except for David and Michaud, who were running in front, everyone was holding back a ball of fire in their hearts. But looking at Tang En, who was also carrying a big backpack, they couldn't say anything. After all, the weight in that backpack was several times more than theirs. Hurry, hurry, hurry. Don't think that you can join the gray space just because you passed the test. I don't want that many people. If a coward gives up, I'll be happy to let him go. Now tell me loudly, has anyone given up? No. I can't hear you. Even the girls' voices are louder than yours. Has anyone given up? No. Hysterical roars came out. TSK, TSK, very good. You're full of energy. Then add another 2 miles. There was a lake about a dozen miles to the east of the valley. After running here, Tang En announced a temporary rest. Wails mixed with relief rang out continuously. Everyone fell to the ground without hesitation. Because they had backpacks with large stones on them, they all looked like turtles that had their shells flipped over. But even so, they felt that this was the most comfortable bed they had ever slept on since they were born. They rested for about 15 minutes. Now untie the backpack. Tang En's order came. Wise. Everyone was so excited that tears streamed down their faces. This thing is not something that can be carried by humans. Everyone struggled to free their aching shoulders from the coarse cloth, and suddenly felt their bodies relax. Now take off your clothes, jump into the river, and swim to the other side. Everyone was stunned. Some people couldn't help but pick their ears. Did I hear wrong? Swim now? It's winter. Won't you freeze to death? Hurry, hurry, I don't want to repeat myself. Now swim to the other side. Tang En's roar came again. Now, no one felt that Tang En was wise anymore. He was simply a demon through and through. Bang, bang, roar. Yes. Water splashed everywhere. David and Michaud jumped into the cold lake at the same time. They shivered, then stretched out their arms and swam to the other side. What are you waiting for? If you don't jump now, you'll all be considered as giving up. Remember, I don't want cowards. Everyone looked at each other and swallowed their saliva as they looked at the lake. There was a shrill scream, and then Luke took off his clothes and fell into the river. Then, the screams grew louder, with one person taking the lead. The rest was easy. Amidst all kinds of screams to cheer themselves on, one figure after another jumped into the river. The lake instantly became quite lively, and the early water birds flapped their wings and flew away. Obviously, the high decibels here scared them. Tang En frowned, because there was still one person on the shore. Tang En had some impression of this person. His name was Harry, and his specialty was that he was quick-witted. Regardless of whether it was his memory or his logic, he was very good. An efficient team naturally needed someone who could come up with ideas and command. So, even though he was fat, Tang En still let him join. Why aren't you jumping? Are you giving up? No, Harry said with a sad face. I can't swim. Stunned for a moment, Tang En then said with a smile, then congratulations. Harry rolled his eyes and said in delight, Are you saying that I don't have to go down anymore? What I mean is, congratulations on learning how to swim. As soon as he said that, bang! There was a scream as the fat Harry was kicked into the river by Tang En. Then, there was another earth-shattering howl as Harry struggled in the water and tried to swim to the shore. But halfway through, he saw Tang En standing on the shore with his arms crossed and a smile, and couldn't help but shiver again. Then, he gritted his teeth helplessly and swam to the other side. You're still too inexperienced to play tricks in front of me. In the next 4 days, Tang En led the dozens of people through all kinds of training. In the morning, they did physical training, and in the afternoon, they taught survival knowledge in the wild. Among them, more than 10 people couldn't take the torture and chose to give up in the end. In this regard, Tang En didn't say much and let them go easily. Perhaps it was because these people told Tang En's training methods, so his title of Devil quickly spread in the camp. Of course, Tang En didn't care about this. At this time, he was leading the remaining 20 people to the forest dozens of kilometers away from the valley. This is the final stage of elimination. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 164. After the Grey Coat Army chose to set up camp in the valley, the surrounding terrain of dozens of kilometers was naturally investigated. Tang En borrowed the information and finally found the forest in front of him. Compared to the forests that were easily tens of thousands of square miles, this one was not big, but it was enough for training. A pile of daggers, short swords, and a cylindrical object were thrown in front of everyone. Each of you pick one. 3 days later, at this time, I will be waiting for you on the other side of the forest. Well, I pray that you have listened carefully to the wilderness survival methods I taught you a few days ago. This training is life-threatening. It is not too late to quit now. If you can't hold on halfway, you can light the signal cylinder. Of course, this means that you are eliminated. The so-called signal cylinder was similar to the colored signal flares used by the Brand military. Of course, the Grey Coat Army was not so advanced. These signal cylinders were not alchemy products, but rough handmade products. After being lit, the plants inside would slowly float with colored smoke. After a few days of training, everyone knew that there was no reason to reason with Tang En, so they silently picked up a short sword and a signal cylinder. As for giving up? What a joke, all the suffering they suffered a few days ago would have been in vain. Haha, very good. Your courage is commendable. Tang En clapped his hands twice and smiled. Finally, a friendly reminder. Those with the spine up are all edible. Let's go. Those with the spine up are all edible. Everyone was shocked by this sentence, then turned around and went into the forest. David Michaud, you have to work hard these few days. Patrol the north and south of the forest. Haha, there are always some people who think they are smart and want to cheat. Hearing the order, David and Michaud nodded and left along the periphery of the forest. Tang, is this a good idea? Can they hold on? Josiah, who was wearing a white robe, came over with a look of pity. After hearing Tang En's plan yesterday, she insisted on bringing a team of healers with her. Josiah now often followed Rosa around, so he still had this kind of power. Don't look down on people. Besides, have you forgotten? You stayed in the forest for more than 10 days before. That's different. After a moment of shock, Josiah looked at the jungle in front of him and said worriedly, We had many people together at that time, and we could encourage each other. They're all alone now, it's too dangerous. Danger? They were considered lucky. If the old housekeeper was here, it would be considered lucky if 1 or 2 of them could survive. Tang En shook his head. They have to get used to being alone. Hee, how can they not be cruel to themselves when they want to kill people? Besides, if the people I nurtured were to be chopped up like vegetables, that would be a disgrace. After a pause, he continued, all right, let's go to the other side of the forest. TSK, I'll show you my ability to build a house on a tree. On a tree? Of course. How else would I be able to see if someone didn't release smoke? Those who had never been alone in the jungle would never know the difficulties inside. It was a kind of hopeless despair that made people feel helpless. In a dark environment where danger lurked everywhere, you had to be alert at all times. First of all, there was the water source. In the jungle, it was best not to touch the puddles that looked clean. Because it was a paradise for all kinds of beasts, they wouldn't mind enjoying a sumptuous lunch after drinking enough water. If you were lucky, you could find a water source that didn't have any beast claw marks around it. Unfortunately, the water was most likely poisonous. Next was the food. If you didn't have extraordinary skills, don't expect to catch a pheasant or a hare in here. Because the dangerous environment had already trained them, the slightest sign of trouble would immediately escape. Well, there wasn't much hope for meat, but there was still vegetarian food, right? There was never a lack of green vegetation in the jungle, and wild vegetables that looked fresh and delicious. Well, this idea was right, but you must first have the ability to recognize poison. What, you don't have it? Then I'm sorry, you can only eat those things that look like they have been gnawed by small animals. Although they are leftovers, at least it's safe. Also, rest. Don't have the stupid idea of forcing yourself to not sleep for 3 days. That was a method that could only be used in a team. When you were alone, your tired brain would cause you to crash directly into a beast's nest. Since rest was necessary, the location had to be particular. If you randomly found a place to lie down, then you must be prepared to never wake up. Well, at that time, you wouldn't think of waking up, because all kinds of reptiles and poisonous snakes would have already settled down in your body. In addition to these, there was also the possibility of getting lost, as well as sudden attacks and so on. In conclusion, if possible, it's best not to enter the jungle. Of course, if you want to commit suicide, then you are welcome here. Forget about tombs and stone tablet. Turn into all kinds of feces, dust to dust, earth to earth. TSK, green environmental protection. 3 days passed quickly. During these days, Tang En and Josiah had a good time. The tree house was rich with the smell of nature, various kinds of wild animals, the sound of the wind in the forest like the sound of nature. Everything made people forget about home. The so-called outing was nothing more than this. Josiah grew up in an aristocratic environment. Although he yearned for freedom in his heart, he had never really experienced this. After joining the Gray Coat Army, he was busy running from place to place. Now that he suddenly felt the charm of nature, everything felt new and interesting. It's so comfortable. Well, if one day the reform is successful, I will definitely choose to live such a life. Facing the early morning sun, Josiah stretched his back and sighed. The faint red light, the gentle night breeze, and the exquisite curves made her look like the goddess of dawn at this moment. Josiah, your dream will come true. With a slightly magnetic voice, the handsome Borg walked over from behind and smiled. Half a day after the members of the Gray Space entered the jungle, Borg followed them. The reason was to see Tang En's training method. Well, definitely. Josiah clenched his fist and waved at the rising sun. Just as Borg was about to say something, Josiah's eyes suddenly lit up and he pointed at the jungle. Look, there's someone. Borg turned his head and looked. Indeed, a ragged figure stumbled out of the bushes, splitting them apart and running out from inside. When he saw the camp, he suddenly knelt on the ground and covered his face with his hands. He seemed to be crying tears of joy. Tang, someone came out. Josiah turned back and cheered. I see it. Tang En pinched the bridge of his nose and jumped down from the treehouse. Last night there were smoke signals coming out of several places. He ran back and forth for half the night, so naturally, he was not in good spirits. Then, the well-prepared treatment team carried the person on a stretcher. pouring water and taking medicine. Everything was done in an orderly manner. After that, some people successfully walked out one after another. Their miserable appearance, the act of hugging their heads and crying bitterly, and then holding the water bottle and gulping it down without a care. This was almost the same process after everyone came out. TSK, not bad, not bad. Tang-en looked at the circle of members who looked like beggars and counted with a smile. 8 came out, 9 were eliminated. Well, there are still 3 who haven't come out. As the sun gradually rose, 2 more members walked out from inside. However, when it was almost noon, the last person still did not come out. Who's the other one? Michaud looked at the crowd and frowned. There's also Luke. Luke, that idiot? Tang-en opened his mouth and then held his forehead. I forgot about him. All members, listen up, follow me into the jungle. Let's go too. It's easier to find the more people, Josiah said quickly. After Tang-en entered the jungle, he took a deep breath and his pupils suddenly elongated into the shape of almonds, like a cat's eyes. Peak beginner. Nothing could be hidden from him. The skill lasts for 5 minutes, cooldown time is 10 minutes, and consumes 500 blood energy. This was a skill in the layout. Because it was not used in combat, Tang-en had not learned it seriously before. Recently, he had just started to learn it and now it came in handy. After activating the skill, the environment in his line of sight became very strange. It was as if all kinds of objects had become simple lines that looked clear at a glance. Who left this mark? It's mine. What about this? This is mine. Soon, the members who followed him all opened their mouths wide in shock as they watched Tang-en point out the places they had passed through one by one. If this was an opponent, everyone shivered and did not dare to think about it. Opening, buffering, opening, buffering. After searching for about 3 hours, Tang-en finally found traces of an unclaimed area. Then, he continued to search forward. But after walking for half an hour, everyone was speechless because the route was clearly horizontal. In other words, Luke's original east-west training path was now heading north. Didn't this guy look at the sun in the sky? The jungle covered a large area from east to west and a small area from north to south. So, under Tang-en's rapid guidance, an hour later, everyone realized that they were almost out of the jungle. Where did this guy go? David asked gloomily as he cut through the bushes in his way. You still have the nerve to say that. You were the one who saw the north periphery. You didn't even know that someone walked out, Tang-en said unhappily. David scratched his head embarrassedly and continued forward. This way. Tang-en observed the last trace left by Luke in the jungle, and then headed west. This idiot was actually going back in the same direction. After they reached the mountain path, David, who was walking in the front, suddenly shouted, "Boss, over there!" Everybody raised their heads and saw a vague figure on a hill looking west with his back to them. Wait! Tang-en kicked off a rock and directly climbed up. Everybody watched as the figure quickly rose up. Any protruding point on the hill became a target for him to use as he dodged, turned, leapt, and moved. He did a series of movements with ease, and it was very enjoyable to watch. Will we be like this in the future? The thought suddenly popped into everybody's minds, and they were immediately filled with passion. Tang-en did not know what kind of shock his unconscious actions would bring to others. A few minutes later, he successfully reached the top of the hill. At that moment, Luke still didn't seem to feel anything. He was lying behind a huge rock and looking outside in a daze. Tang-en frowned and walked up behind him. He was about to give him a knock on the head, when he was suddenly stunned. Looking past the huge rock, he saw a black mass of people in green armor in the distance. They were orderly in a square formation that stretched for several kilometers. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 165. Although they were looking from afar, The army's murderous aura was already close to them. Everyone crouched behind the boulder and looked at the majestic scene in front of them. They couldn't help but hold their breaths. This was the unique deterrence of an army. In front of such power, a single person seemed extremely small. Why do these people look a little familiar? At this moment, only David was still observing as if nothing had happened. Phew! Coming back to his senses, Borg let out a long breath. His expression was terrible. The Grey Flame Army. Josiah also recalled that the style of armor of the soldiers in front of them was the same as the group of spearmen that they met when they rescued Mutuo's team. Oh, it's them. David suddenly realized. He stretched his head. How many people are there? About 5,000 now. The mountain behind blocked them so I can't see clearly. Borg was good at military affairs and was naturally good at measuring the number of soldiers. However, this Grey Flame army was really huge. After many turns on the mountain path, they were still blocked. Wow, so many. What are they doing here? David asked after a moment of shock. Borg opened his mouth and was speechless. Weren't they obviously here for the Grey Coat Army? Otherwise, with so many soldiers covered in dust, could it be that they were taking a stroll after a meal? That's strange. How did they know our location? There are so many soldiers. We're going to fight again. I wonder what Leader Luosa and the rest will do. Josiah looked worried. Our location will be exposed sooner or later, Borg comforted. Josiah, don't worry. There will be a way. Besides, now that we know their location, we can at least gain the upper hand. Yes, I hope so. David, who was watching them talk, suddenly slapped his thigh. I know. Huh. The two of them looked back. These soldiers are here for the Grey Coat Army. David looked very anxious. Boss is back. Now, the members of the Grey Space basically addressed Tang En the way David did. On the other side, Tang En, who was climbing the mountain, threw a soldier in light leather armor to the ground. As the army advanced, there were naturally scattered scouts in front of them to scout the way. Since they had bumped into each other, Tang En and the others naturally would not turn around and leave. They had to catch someone to collect some information. Josiah, you take the healers and leave first. Okay, you guys stay here, Tang En said as he pointed at the members who had passed the test. Josiah was a little confused, but he still left with his men. However, the mountain top was only so big. Following the wind, she could still vaguely hear some words such as explanation and means. Then, there were some strange noises, like the buzzing of a mouse in a can of oil. It did not take long. After about 10 minutes, Tang En waved for them to come over. When they got closer, they heard Tang En say, Hey, why is Brother Borg here too? Didn't you go over just now? That. Borg's face was pale, and his expression was rather complicated. He swallowed a few times, but still couldn't finish his sentence. Next to him, the members of the Grey Space were also in a daze. Their eyes were unfocused. Tang, what's wrong with them? Josiah blinked and asked after looking around. Tang En spread his hands and smiled. It's nothing. I chatted with the scout just now. They might have been frightened by what I said. Chatted for a while? Everybody tried hard to suppress the churning in their stomach. Was that a chat? The first thing he did was to stuff her mouth shut, and then show her all kinds of organs. Frightened? Is it serious? Josiah asked nervously, his eyes wide. Yes. It's not good. There are almost 10,000 soldiers of the Blue Flame Legion over there. Let's go back and tell the chief and the others. Tang En led the way down the mountain. Then, as if he thought of something, he turned around and said, You, the one with no sense of direction. Yes, you. Go and take back the scout's equipment. Me? Luke pointed at himself, his lips trembling. Everybody looked at this unlucky guy with, My condolences, brother. Take it back, and the equipment is yours. Why, you don't want to. I do. Luke's sense of direction was a little bad, but he wasn't stupid. He quickly realized what Tang En meant. Tang En wanted to take him into the gray space. Tang En didn't get much information from the scout. It wasn't that he didn't interrogate properly, but that the scout had limited information to begin with. Fortunately, the Blue Flame Legion was still some distance away. Tang En and the others quickly went down the mountain and ran straight through the forest toward the valley. They finally returned to the valley in the evening. At the moment, there were many carriages blocking the entrance of the valley. It seemed that something was being transported in. An old man was giving orders non-stop. Father, you're back?" A joyful voice called out. "HM? Oh, it's Borg." The neatly dressed old man with curly hair turned around and waved when he saw Borg, who had escaped from the crowd. "The flower can't be placed in a damp place. Remember to use some wooden boards to separate it." "Yes, Minister." After a few more instructions, the curly-haired old man finally had time. He turned around and saw that everyone was sweating profusely. Puzzled, he asked, "What's going on?" "Father, bad news." Borg stepped forward and whispered into his father's ear. "Really?" The curly-haired old man was stunned and frowned. After a few breaths, his expression returned to normal. He looked at everyone and asked, "These are?" "Oh, let me introduce them. Josiah, this is my father. Father, this is Magician Josiah, and this is Brother Tang and his subordinate. Josiah sends his greetings." "You must be Minister Bosco. I've heard about you from Chief Lhasa." Josiah bowed. "Hello, Minister Bosco." Tang En and the members of the Gray Space greeted him. When Tang En had just joined the Gray Coat Army, he had heard from others that Borg's family had been suppressed after committing a crime and rebelling, and then collectively joined the Gray Coat Army. Obviously, the old man in front of him was the former Viscount Bosco. "Well, hello." Bosco returned a simple greeting and then nodded. "It's nice to meet you all. You've done a great job today. Let's go and meet Chief Lhasa first." This old man Bosco seemed to be very swift and decisive. After a simple introduction, he led everyone straight to Lhasa's house. On the way, he did not forget to send someone to invite old General Omeng and a few other important people. After arriving at the destination, Lhasa was discussing something with some people in the house. Old General Omeng, whom Tang En had met before, happened to be there too. "Oh, you're all here. That's great," Bosco said after entering the house. "Haha, Bosco is back. How was it? Did the grain purchase go smoothly?" The muscular Omeng also had a loud voice. "It went smoothly. I'll report it in detail later." Bosco nodded and then pointed at Tang En and the rest. "Now, let's deal with the unexpected situation that they discovered." Unexpected situation? Isn't this Josiah and Tang En? I remember you guys." Omeng was familiar with them and recognized them immediately. Tang En took a step forward and after a simple greeting, he reported the news that he had received from the scout. "What?" The people in the house were shocked. Following that, Omeng's roar could be heard. "Men, pass down my orders. Order the scouts to head east, south, and north. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation." Chapter 166. Michaud, go get the light leather armor we seized earlier and distribute it to everyone. David, go find Darren and see if he can get a few sets of armor and a dozen shields. Do you have any family members here? None? Okay, go back and pack up. Gather here later. With such an emergency military situation, the leaders of the Gray Coat Army naturally had to discuss it. Tang En and the others could not participate in such a meeting, so they left after reporting the news. After that, he instructed David and Michaud to make all kinds of preparations. Tang En did not want the newly formed Gray Space to die so early. The current situation was unclear, and it was hard to say if these preparations would be useful. But no matter what, they had to do something to make people feel at ease. After waving his hand to dismiss everyone, Tang En looked at the lively and peaceful valley and let out a long breath. It was not easy to rebel. This place would probably not be like this soon. At night, the sound of galloping horses could be heard in the valley from time to time. This was the sound of the scouts constantly transmitting all kinds of information. The huge valley gradually became restless because of this. At this time, there were no people wandering around the house. The children were also ordered to stay at home and not go out. Every family seemed to be busy organizing their things. Although the atmosphere gradually became heavy, everyone's reaction was not slow. They were obviously used to this kind of scene. Soon, a group of messengers appeared. They seemed to be informing and mobilizing one by one. Not long after, Tang En's door was knocked. He was told to pack up and gather at the west side of the valley. From the looks of it, they had decided to move. But the west side? Tang En was stunned. Were they still going to break out from the Grey Flame Army? It seemed that there was also a blockade in the other direction. The relocation of the camp was naturally not a small matter. After it officially began, the noise gradually grew louder. The Grey Coat Army began to appear in every corner of the valley. Their role was to maintain order and help the civilians move things. The Grey Space Team had just been established and had not been included in the military. Therefore, Tang En and his members lived with the civilians who were engaged in production. For example, Luke used to be in charge of transportation and unloading. That quick-witted Harry used to do carpentry. Such a person was naturally arranged to be at the back of the team for protection when breaking out of the encirclement. They were all single men, so there was nothing to pack. After a short while, all the members of the Grey Space had arrived. Tang En distributed the various armors. Just as he was about to announce their departure, someone knocked on the door again. "Excuse me, are you the captain of the Grey Space, Tang En?" After the door opened, a young man in plate armor saluted. I am. Hello, Captain Tang. I'm from the Tactical Command Center. This is your mission this time." The young man handed over a yellowed piece of paper. Mission? Tang En was stunned. Their Grey Space Team had only been formed for a week, and they already had a mission to do so soon? With doubts, Tang En unfolded the paper. The message was very concise. The general idea was for the Grey Space Team to arrive at a certain place in the east before noon tomorrow. They were to meet up with the team that had returned to the Grey Coat Army headquarters and return together with them. At the end was the seal of the Tactical Command Center. This mission was easy to understand. Due to the recent encirclement, all the small teams were moving closer to the headquarters. For example, Darren's team that Tang En was in previously. However, due to the varying distances between each team and the headquarters, as well as various other reasons, the time they returned to the headquarters was not fixed. Take this week for example, there were teams returning almost every day. Now that the headquarters in the valley had been discovered, they were preparing to move. Naturally, these small teams could not return. Otherwise, they would run right into the blades of the army soldiers. What Tang En and the others had to do was to guard the path they had to pass through and wait for the small team to return. Then, they would return the same way they came. East now? After Tang En finished reading, he was surprised. Yes, this is the map. The young man handed over another piece of paper and said, "By the way, the scouts have already investigated. There are no soldiers blocking the east. They probably know that we won't move in that direction." Tang En was stunned and then understood. Yes, to the west was deep into the 100,000 mountains. There was a lot of room for strategic change there. If they went east, the space was limited, and they would easily be surrounded by the pursuers. Military orders had to be obeyed. Tang En could only nod and agree. He gave up his original plan to move. Since they needed to march in a hurry, they couldn't bring shields or anything like that. After tidying up their equipment, Tang En and the members of the Grey Space set off. At this time, the entrance of the valley was already under martial law. However, when Tang En showed the mission paper with the Tactical Command Center's seal, they were quickly let go. Then, the group disappeared into the night in the east. At the entrance of the valley, two figures walked out. Uncle, shouldn't you be very busy now? Why did you pull me here? Borg was confused. Look, do you know them? A middle-aged man pointed into the distance. Borg narrowed his eyes and said in surprise, That's Tang En and his gray space members? Why are they going out at this time? Hee, they're going out to meet up with the small team that arrived later. The middle-aged man smiled with his hands behind his back. Meet up with the small team? Borg thought for a while and said, Haven't there been any small teams coming back recently? When the small teams returned, they would go to the intelligence agency in the nearby city to ask for the headquarters address. At this time, the intelligence agency would send people back to the headquarters, and they would be ready to meet up with them. For example, when they came back together, the old General Omeng had already come out more than 10 miles in advance to greet them. The middle-aged man said in a relaxed tone, If I say there is, then there is. Uncle knows what you're thinking. You can focus on pursuing Josiah in the future. Aye. Borg's expression suddenly froze. His hidden thoughts were suddenly exposed, and he seemed to be a little flustered. Don't say there isn't. Although you haven't been back to the headquarters for long, you've used the excuse of going to the publicity department many times. A few days ago, you even went to someone's training camp. Well, if it's an ordinary girl, I won't help you. However, this Josiah is a magician. Maybe the opportunity for our family to rise in the future lies with her. Borg was silent. Then, he seemed to have thought of something, and his face was shocked. Uncle, you sent a fake order to Tang En? No, the order is naturally real. It has my seal in the command center on it. Well, it's just a mistake. You know, it's a little chaotic tonight, so it's reasonable to send the wrong order. After a pause, the middle-aged man said calmly, If this Tang something can come back, I'll apologize to him. If he can't come back, Borg licked his lip. Will he die? Not tonight, but he'll probably die tomorrow night, the middle-aged man said casually. You're also from the tactical department. You should know that we're surrounded by soldiers in the west, south, and north, but not in the east. This is a typical situation where they want to chase us to the east. However, the people of the 3 major legions have underestimated our strength. When we force our way out from the west tonight, the east will become an important logistical route for them to pursue us. After a pause, the middle-aged man continued, By then, the defense there will be tight, and it'll be time for them to die. Borg looked into the distance blankly. At this time, Tang En and the others had already disappeared. His expression changed a few times, and he bowed. Thank you, Uncle. The middle-aged man shook his head with a smile. No need to thank me. You should think of a way to get Josiah. Unfortunately, she's very liked by Luosa now, so some methods can't be used easily. Uncle, I'll use my ability to get her. Borg seemed to be a little disgusted by this method. Well, that's good, the middle-aged man said noncommittally. Then he said, Oh, your father is back. Don't tell him about this. Otherwise, he'll blame me for acting on my own. Okay, got it? Alright, let's go back. The breakout is about to begin. If you like this work, you're welcome to come to Chidien. Come to vote. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 167. The night was like a curtain, and the dark moon seemed to be frightened. It hid behind the dark clouds and peeked at the boundary of the 100,000 mountains. On the rugged mountain road, densely packed dots like ants moved forward. Zooming in soldiers wrapped in cold iron, orderly phalanxes, and endless troops. The atmosphere was as cold as ice, and killing intent filled the air. The biting cold wind blew the war flag, the sound of firecrackers, and the purple star symbol was faintly discernible. Without a doubt, this was the army of 100 victories, the Zechen Legion. Brigadier General, speed is the most important thing in war. Now that the enemy is in front, why don't we rush to catch the enemy off guard? In the middle of the army, a large group of people riding horses moved slowly. Lair, who was walking in front, was expressionless. The military academy students behind him were quite excited after they finished speaking. This was also imaginable. They had been in the Zechen Legion for more than a month, but they had never seen a real battle. It was not easy to be sent to the combat force to watch the encirclement and suppression, but in more than 10 days, in order to explore the position of the enemy's main force, they did not even fight a small battle. Now that they knew that the enemy was in front of them and that the battle was about to start, how could they not be excited? The middle-aged brigadier general shook his head and chuckled. "Haha, soldiers are impermanent and water is impermanent. War is not a deduction on the map. Speed is the most important thing in war, but it has to be based on the specific situation. Although we are only a few dozen miles away from the enemy, the mountain road is very rugged and difficult to walk. If we blindly pursue speed, the soldiers will be exhausted when they reach there, and it will be easy for the enemy to easily defeat them." This was the truth. A few dozen miles away, unless they had cavalry in their hands, they could still try to rush. But in a mountain battle, no brainless commander would bring cavalry. If they crashed together and fell to their deaths, how could they talk about an attack? I understand. Thank you for your guidance, Brigadier General. The students suddenly understood and bowed in admiration. Haha, these are all military knowledge. It's enough that you know. The key is to learn and apply the knowledge in book. The middle-aged brigadier general stroked his beard and laughed loudly. Of course, apart from these factors, the brigadier general did not mention another important reason. Encirclement and suppression was a joint task of the 3 legions and the 4 suzerains. Now, in front of them was the Grey Coat Army, not the small detachment that could snatch credit from them. If they hurried over, they would easily become the primary target. In that case, the other people who arrived later would be able to profit with minimal losses. Naturally, he couldn't do such a thing that would only benefit others. Also, apart from paying attention to the marching speed, these soldiers. The middle-aged brigadier general, who liked to be a teacher, gave the students some pointers in order to gain the pleasure of being respected. Suddenly, tap, 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 2 fast horses galloped from the side of the group. It was obvious that these 2 people were expert horsemen at first glance. In such a small space, they still seemed to be able to handle it with ease. "Scout, who's behind us?" a student asked after taking a look. From their light leather armor, one could tell that both of them were scouts. The one in front was a scout from the Zechen Legion, but the one behind was not. "That's a scout from the Tsang Yen Legion." The middle-aged brigadier general's expression suddenly turned ugly. The situation is not good. Soon, the scout arrived in front of Lei Fu. "General, our legion was attacked by the enemy 1.5 hours ago. We are requesting reinforcements." Lei Fu frowned and waved his hand. "Pass down the order. Hurry up. Pass down the order. The swordsman's camp will send reinforcements." The swordsman's camp was made up of light and heavy soldiers. In such a terrain, they were the fastest to advance. Lei Fu's plan was obvious. He hoped that the swordsman's camp would arrive quickly to help, following which the Zechen Legion's speed increased. All the soldiers trotted forward. The sound of armor shaking, the sound of weapons clashing. On the winding mountain road, it was as if a long snake was slithering forward. After 2 hours of rapid advance, the Zechen Legion arrived at the valley. At this moment, the valley was silent. Only the wooden houses that stood tall told everyone that a large group of people had once lived here. Tap, 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 tap. Suddenly, the sound of hurried footsteps could be heard from the north of the valley. The soldiers of the Zechen Legion reacted quickly. Under the orders of their officers, they quickly spread out, raised their shields, raised their spears, and drew their bows. Rows of armored soldiers appeared from the north of the valley. Enemy attack. Alert! The soldiers who came out first were stunned when they saw such a large formation. They quickly raised their shield. Stop, stop, don't hurt them. We are the Zechen Legion. Are you the Thunderbolt's army? The officer in the front row had sharp eyes and shouted. They were wearing Bran-style armor and had surrounded them from the north. This was undoubtedly the Thunderbolt's army. After the crisis was resolved, the troops regrouped. General Lei Fu, you also received General Gary's request for reinforcements? Baylor controlled his horse and led a group of cavalry over. Yes. Lei Fu nodded. But Baylor slapped his leg armor. With General Gary's personality, sigh, this is not good. He didn't say it clearly, but everyone understood. If he wasn't forced, why would the Northern Grey Wolf send reinforcements? Moreover, there was also the Zechen Legion that he didn't like. Go after them, Lei Fu said expressionlessly. This was something that couldn't be helped. In the current situation, they could only rush over and take a look. Thus, the Zechen Legion was in front, and the Thunderbolt's army was behind. They quickly rushed towards the west. After about 2 hours, the sky had started to brighten. In a slightly open area, many soldiers were continuously cleaning up the mess on the ground. They moved the corpses, treated the injured, collected the weapons and armor in the middle. A few people who looked like officers were pointing at a map and discussing something on a huge rock. Beside them, a general with a gloomy expression was listening to the soldiers' report. Suddenly, General Gary, how is the situation? The person hadn't arrived, but the voice was heard first. The muscular Baylor and Lei Fu rushed over with a large group of people. How else could it be? We lost some people and let them break through, Gary said with a cold tone. He had just suffered a small defeat, so naturally, Gary was in a rather gloomy mood. Furthermore, he had originally come to surround them, but he didn't expect that they would be forcefully broken through in the end. This difference would make anyone unhappy. Damn it, they ran so fast. It can't be that someone leaked information, right? Baylor cursed. It's unlikely that they leaked information. Otherwise, they wouldn't even need to fight with me. At this point, a murderous look appeared on Gary's face. Those people from the Northern Intelligence Department deserve to die. What Grey Coat Army, including civilians and soldiers, have 20,000 people? Damn it, during the battle last night, they had at least 25,000 people who were pure fighters. Gary felt aggrieved. Last night, while the army was marching, he suddenly received an urgent report that the Grey Coat Army was breaking through towards him. Although he was a little surprised, he didn't think too much about it. If they came, so be it. With his 10,000 soldiers, how could he not defeat 10,000 civilians? However, when he found an open area to set up his battle formation, he started fighting with the Grey Coat Army. He was shocked to find that the enemy's numbers kept surging in like wave. 10,000, 20,000, 25,000. Attack, stalemate, defense, defeat. The scales of war kept tilting. In the end, if he didn't change his strategy in time, he might not be able to defeat the enemy no matter how many losses he suffered. So many? Baylor opened his mouth and said in shock. It's not a mistake in the intelligence. At this moment, the silent Ralph suddenly spoke. What do you mean, Poker Face? Are you saying that I misreported the number of people to cover up my mistake? Gary suddenly stood up and stared at Ralph with fire in his eyes. He had been on the front lines for most of his life and fought countless people in the barbaric northern wilderness. However, he didn't expect to lose to a group of civilians at the back. Gary was already in a very bad mood. Now that he heard Ralph doubting the situation he saw with his own eyes, he finally exploded. He even called Poker Face a nickname that he usually only called in private. Ralph glanced at him and said expressionlessly, "They're getting stronger." What? Gary was stunned. Unlike Gary, Baylor wasn't blinded by anger. He said thoughtfully, You mean to say that the Grey Coat Army's numbers have increased in this short period of time? Ralph nodded. The number of people in the Grey Coat Army was hard to measure. The people from the Northern Wilderness Intelligence Department naturally wouldn't go and measure again every few months. If that was the case, they wouldn't be able to do any other work. Therefore, the 20,000 figure was actually the result of their measurement last year. If that's the case, then the speed at which the Grey Coat Army is increasing their numbers is too terrifying, Baylor said emotionally. Everyone nodded silently. It should be known that the soldiers of the Grey Coat Army didn't have a fixed salary. They would never be able to glorify their homeland. However, even so, there were still so many people who decided to join. It was terrifying. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 168. 100,000 Mountains, Nameless Mountain Range. Although it was winter, today was a rare day of good weather. The cold wind wasn't strong, and the warm sun was lazy. Boss, are we in the right place? Why isn't that squad here yet? The dozen or so members of the Gray Space Team were lying on the back of the mountain. David looked impatiently at the sun that was about to reach their heads. Tang En rolled his eyes. Your boss isn't bad at directions. Let's wait and see. They had traveled all the way last night and finally arrived at this intersection the next morning. However, the squad still hadn't appeared. I wonder if HQ has broken through? David plucked a blade of grass and held it in his mouth as he spoke in boredom. Tang En said casually, it shouldn't be a problem. After all, before he could finish, Luke, who had been monitoring from the top of the mountain, suddenly turned around and said anxiously, Boss, someone's coming. Although Luke's sense of direction was terrible, his eyesight wasn't bad. This was probably because he had been practicing throwing since he was young. Hearing this, everyone quickly rushed forward. Sure enough, they could vaguely see black dots walking over from the mountains. Haha, they're finally here. David laughed and was about to stand up. Come, let's go. Get down. Tang En pulled David to the ground and narrowed his eyes. This formation doesn't seem right. When the Grey Coat Army marched normally, they wouldn't advance in rows like this group of people. At that moment, Tang En felt that something was amiss. After waiting for a while, this group of troops gradually walked in. Although they couldn't see them clearly, the reflective standard armor was already very eye-catching. Brand regular army? What's going on? Harry exclaimed inwardly. After fighting for so many years, it wasn't like he couldn't recognize this layer of armor. Tang En frowned. Everyone, listen up. Don't make any noise. In a blur, the soldiers seemed to have left a group of people behind on the mountain path in the distance, and the rest of them were still heading toward the hill where Tang En and the others were hiding. Boss, have we been discovered? David crawled to Tang En's side and whispered. Impossible. Tang En shook his head. If they discover us, they can just rush over and encircle us. Why would they need to play tricks with us? Tap tap tap, a large group of soldiers approached, all of them armed with spears. Everyone could not help but lower their heads. With so many soldiers here, if they were exposed, everyone except Tang En would probably die here. All kinds of thoughts flashed through Tang En's mind. Reinforcements? Impossible, there were too few of them. That team was discovered and wiped out? Soldiers patrolling forward? That's possible, however, even if he racked his brains, he wouldn't know that this was just a case of a femme fatale. Hey, it stopped! David exclaimed in a low voice. His body instantly tensed up. It was no wonder that he reacted this way. It turned out that the group of soldiers had stopped at the foot of the mountain at the three-way junction. However, a person who looked like a captain commanded the 20 or so pikemen to stay behind and lead the rest of the soldiers in another direction. Those who stayed behind quickly set up a defense. They cut down trees and placed them in the middle of the mountain road to form a simple barrier. Then, they held their spears and guarded the back. What's going on? Everyone looked at each other. It looked like they were guarding, but what was there to guard in this wilderness? Tangan took a deep breath and said decisively, "Retreat? Go around them and head southeast." The west side was surrounded by the army. Tang En naturally would not choose to go there. Therefore, he could only think of a way to get close to the edge of the Shirwan Mountains and sneak into the city. However, when Tang En turned around and was about to lead everyone down the mountain, his expression suddenly changed. "Get down!" Everyone reacted quickly and hurriedly bent over and lay on the ground. The mountain range that Tang En and the others were in now was not big, but it was not small either. Including the surrounding hills, the area was more than 10 square miles. Right now, another group of soldiers had appeared diagonally behind them. This flag. Solomon family? When the group with the wolf head symbol came to the intersection on the other side of the mountain range, they also left a small group of swordsmen behind and then walked away. Then, to the west of the mountain range, another group of soldiers with the two-headed bird symbol came. Not long after, the members of the gray space found that the 3 intersections of the mountain range were all blocked, forming a triangle. Tang En was really a little dumbfounded at this time. They were just waiting on the side of the road. How did they get surrounded in the end? Fortunately, the soldiers below did not pay attention to the mountain range next to them, so Tang En and the others were still safe for the time being. "Boss, what do we do now?" Tang En opened his mouth and was a little speechless. It was impossible to go to the southeast now. This group of soldiers kept coming. Obviously, there were layers of defense there. After a moment of silence, Tang En said, "Let's rush out at night. This time, go west." The days were short and the nights were long in winter. Night fell quickly. The soldiers on guard did not leave. They found dead branches and dry leaves and lit a pile of bonfires behind the bunker. Compared to the regular army that ate military food, the soldiers on the Lord's side were much more casual. "Haha, don't hide it. I saw you bring a pigeon here. Take it out quickly." "Who's hiding it? Me? Where's your bacon? Isn't it here? Old drunkard, where's your wine? Here, take it." "Damn, you stingy bastard. When we set off, I saw you kick up 4 or 5 bottles. What do you know? We don't know how long we have to stay here. If we finish it in 1 meal, what will we do next time?" In the midst of the verbal abuse, all kinds of food were taken out. Barbecue, soup. Soon, the small checkpoint was filled with the smell of meat and wine. "Damn, Bighead, do you know how to cook? Quickly turn it over, the pigeon is about to be burnt." "Damn, turn it over quickly." Bang! The soldier who was barbecuing suddenly fell down. His huge head was tilted to one side. Under the light of the fire, scarlet liquid flowed out of the wound on his neck. "Enemy, The soldier was shocked. Just as he spat out half a syllable, his head was pierced by a dagger that was shot straight at him. Then, a black shadow rolled past him like the wind. Hiss! The dagger was instantly pulled out with blood, and some red and white sticky liquid. "Kill!" A voice as cold as ice sounded. Whoosh! 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 Dozens of figures suddenly rushed out from the side of the road and pounced on the soldiers, who had a shocked expression on their faces. The first to arrive was a thin young man. He did not hesitate to slit the throat of the soldier. The soldier was shocked and fell back reflexively. Bang! The young man's dagger missed, and he kicked the soldier's crotch without hesitation. Oh, huff, huff! The soldier's long scream did not last long because the dagger persistently slid across his throat. Blood splattered, and the scream turned into a whine. At this time, except for a person who looked like a squad leader, most of the soldiers had not touched their weapons yet. Ha ha! In the laughter, a strong man holding a heavy sword stepped forward and slashed at the squad leader's head. Clang! There was a loud sound of metal colliding, and the squad leader's sword was knocked askew. "Ha ha, take another slash from me." The strong man swung his arm again, and the heavy sword whistled through the air and fell again. Clang! There was another sound of metal colliding. The squad leader felt a pain in his hand, and his sword fell to the ground with a clang. Die! The strong man's third slash came instantly. The squad leader was shocked and quickly rushed to the empty space on the right. You're quite agile," the strong man sighed. He stepped forward and smashed down like a sledgehammer. The squad leader had no choice but to roll again. Bang! 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 Mud flew everywhere and holes were everywhere. Dodge? Dodge again? Damn it, you're still dodging? The strong man was smashing like a mouse. Stop playing, David! When the black shadow passed by, he kicked the squad leader's waist. The latter immediately curled up like a shrimp as if he was struck by lightning. Got it, boss? The strong man took this opportunity and slashed the squad leader's chest. Bang! Although the squad leader was protected by plate armor, his body was still smashed. He spat out a mouthful of blood and remained motionless. There was no doubt that this group of sneak attackers was Tang En and the others. No one knew how long these soldiers would stay here. Most of the mountains were bare, and they couldn't stay here to eat rocks, so breaking out of the encirclement was out of the question. Tang En waved his hand and stabbed a dagger into the heart of a soldier through the plate armor. He pushed the dagger away and looked around. At this time, the soldiers had recovered from the panic of being ambushed, but most of them, who were prepared to enjoy a sumptuous dinner, put their weapons elsewhere. Now, facing these members of the gray space with short daggers barehanded, they were naturally powerless. However, although the situation was under control, Tang En frowned slightly. Although his subordinates had the initiative, they always hesitated when it came to the last strike. With this hesitation, the originally fatal attack could only cause a slight wound to the opponent. These rookies. Tang En's figure flashed and appeared behind a soldier like a ghost. He reached out and grabbed the back of the soldier's neck. Harry, what are you doing? On the battlefield, if you don't kill, others will kill you. If you're so hesitant, you might as well go back and be a carpenter for the rest of your life. Boss. Harry looked at Tang En's gloomy face and said shamefully. Kill him. Tang En's eyes were indifferent. I. The dagger in Harry's hand trembled. Kill him. Tang En's long and narrow eyes narrowed, and his cold, murderous intent was released. Harry howled and stabbed the dagger in his hand into the chest of the soldier, who couldn't move. Clang! The dagger hit the plate armor and slid away. The soldier whose throat was grabbed was about to go crazy. His whole body was cold, and he couldn't move or shout. But, even if he didn't expect to live, at least give him a quick death. Idiot, what did I teach you? Come again. Harry's face was red, and he stabbed the dagger into the soldier's head. Puff! Blood splattered. Ah! The soldier screamed with all his might this time, and finally let out a soft scream. Is this killing? Will stabbing people's eyes kill them? Again. Tang En roared. Harry, who was drenched in blood, stabbed the dagger again with a ferocious expression, and stabbed it into the soldier's forehead. Puff! Ah! Harry's eyes shone with a bloodthirsty light. Retract the dagger, stab. Retract the dagger, stab. Retract the dagger, stab. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 169. Very good. Tang En threw away the body that was riddled with holes. Huff, huff. Harry panted heavily and grinned with an ugly smile. The commotion here wasn't small, and everyone naturally noticed it. The members of the gray space felt their hearts tighten. Those words were directed at Harry, but weren't they also directed at them? On the battlefield, if you didn't kill someone, you would be killed. This was a simple principle. At first, they thought that they could do it and thought that it would be easy. Killing someone was just like that. But when they really faced it, looking at the other party's body and struggling expression, not many people were born murderers, and the feeling of killing someone with their own hands wasn't good, but there was no need for them to dwell on it. At that moment, Tang En had already begun to control the next soldier. With his current strength, as long as these soldiers didn't appear in groups, it was easy for him to capture them. This time, he was facing Luke, and his close-range combat ability was still a little weak. When Tang En arrived, his dagger had already been taken away. He took the soldier's dagger and threw it to Luke, who had retreated a dozen steps. "Stand there. Target's forehead. Throw." Luke raised the dagger hesitantly. Shaking his head, Tang En picked up the dagger and stuffed it into the soldier's hand. "Kill him and you can live." As soon as he said that, he let go and stepped back. The soldier opened his mouth and looked at the dagger in his hand. He then looked back at Tang En with an indifferent expression. Finally, he licked his lips and looked at Luke. Whether or not Tang En was telling the truth, he had no choice. Besides, no matter what, he could at least kill someone with him, right? The soldier grinned maliciously and slowly walked toward Luke. This was also a strategy. Under heavy pressure, the rookie soldier's limbs would go soft and he wouldn't be able to attack. Unexpectedly, when Luke saw the approaching soldier, his hands trembled slightly and he roared, "Kill!" He stepped forward and swung his arm. Whoosh! The dagger closed the distance of a dozen steps in the blink of an eye. Shocked, the soldier raised his dagger slightly, but there was no time to defend himself. His eyes lit up. The blade light was dazzling. F***ck. The corner of Tang En's mouth twitched. His right hand moved like a blur as he stretched out two fingers and caught the dagger that was coming straight for his glabella. How big of a grudge was that? Old. Luke's eyes were blank as he waved his arms in front of him. "Stop talking. Focus." Again. Tang En flicked his wrist, and the dagger fell into Luke's hand. The soldier also came back to his senses. At this time, he did not dare to use any psychological tactics and quickly rushed forward. 8 steps, 7 steps, 6 steps. At that moment, Luke seemed to be overwhelmed. He took a step back and swallowed. Tang En frowned slightly. Rotten wood, in the end, could it not be carved? At this moment, "Kill!" Luke suddenly took another step forward and swung his arm. Whoosh! Haha, silly bird. The moment Luke swung his arm, the soldier covered his forehead with his left hand. 2 attacks in the same way. Did he think that I wouldn't be prepared? The soldier was covered in armor, and there weren't many places that could be attacked. As long as he protected his face, what could the weapon that had left his hand do to him? But as soon as he finished speaking, the soldier ran forward a few steps and rushed in front of Luke. His legs suddenly gave way and he fell to his knees. The tip of the dagger behind his head was shocking. From this angle, the dagger had pierced through his mouth and through his entire head. Pah! Clapping his hands, Tang En walked over and patted Luke's shoulder. "Good job." Luke stared blankly at the soldier at his feet. His lips trembling, he murmured, Thank you. I was going to shoot his forehead. Everyone, run." After seeing Tang En help someone kill their companion twice, a soldier finally couldn't take it anymore and turned to run. At that moment there were still a dozen soldiers left. Seeing that someone was taking the lead to run, the rest of them immediately abandoned their opponents and ran in all directions. "You want to run?" Tang En picked up the dagger and flashed away. In fact, if these soldiers had fought wholeheartedly, they might have been able to injure these rookies. But now, they had chosen to run and betray their backs. In this situation, David and Michaud naturally wouldn't be polite. As they chased after the soldiers, their weapons quickly pierced through their hearts, heads, and other vital points. With their help, Tang En didn't have to chase too far before he easily killed the soldiers one by one. In the end, when he turned back, he was still carrying the 2 soldiers who had run the furthest. Of course, from the irregular and twisted legs, it was obvious that they couldn't run anymore. Bang! He threw them to the ground. I'll ask, you'll answer. Whoever answers faster, I'll give him a quick death. Why are you here this time? The two soldiers looked at each other and didn't answer. This was human nature. After all, they were going to die at the enemy's hands. Why would they answer a question? Tsk tisk, you'd rather die than submit to me. Tang En smacked his lip. I hope you won't regret it later. After he finished speaking, a bloody aura appeared on his palms and he pressed them on the soldiers' chests. The effect of the blood chi invasion was like taking a dozen knives and constantly cutting the internal organs and meridians. In this case, the only way was to use do chi to forcibly suppress or expel it. But of course, these two ordinary soldiers didn't have any do chi. In an instant, the two soldiers' bodies began to distort and sweat appeared on their foreheads. Amidst the incessant screams, his body was like a fish out of water, flopping and trembling. His arms continuously pounded on his chest, as if he was trying to suppress the pain inside, but also as if he was trying to use the external pain to distract himself. But this was far from enough. I'll talk. One of the soldiers couldn't bear it and roared in pain. Unexpectedly, the other soldier directly answered Tang En's question. Garrison, we're here to protect the safety of the supply route. Not bad, you've learned how to answer first. Congratulations. Tang En pressed his arm on the soldier's body and retracted the blood chi. Huff. The soldier stopped twisting and gasping for breath. David, bring this soldier over there. Let everyone test their swords on him. Be careful not to hit the vital parts at first. Damn it, I don't believe that I can't train you. Yes. David lifted the soldier who was still struggling, and all the members of the gray space followed with pale faces. Let's do it again. You mentioned supplies just now. What supplies are they? Tang En squatted down and asked. Suddenly, a scream came from the other side. Tang En frowned and turned his head. Please, shut his mouth. Sorry, you can continue. Yes, boss. David responded from afar. The soldier trembled. I'm not too sure. I heard that the Grey Coat Army broke out of the encirclement. Everyone is chasing after them, so we have to ensure the supply of supplies to the rear. Twain nodded and then asked, So, in the southeast direction, there are also soldiers like you who set up defenses? Yes. Huff. Okay, last question. When you came, did you see or hear a group of Grey Coat Army passing by? No. Thank you. I'll bury you later. Thank you. You're welcome. He waved his dagger. Tang En got up. Of course, the soldier didn't know too much. Based on what he knew, Tang En and the others were in a bad situation. They were surrounded by trees. After a while, David came over with the other members and spread his hand. Boss, I'm sorry. I lost too much blood. Tang En nodded and looked at the group of members who had unnatural expressions. He took a deep breath and said, I don't want to see what happened today a second time. You chose your own path. It's not easy to be a hero. There are still many dangers ahead of us. I can't even guarantee that I'll survive this time. So, if something like this happens again in the future, I'll kill you first. Don't blame me for being cruel, because you'll kill everyone who doesn't want to die. You only have one life, so please cherish yours and don't look down on others. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 170. The bonfire crackled, and the members of the gray space were silently cleaning up the scene. Tang En's previous words were very simple, and they naturally understood. The principle was the same, and whether they could do it or not depended on themselves. Of course, it was not to the extent that these words could make them completely reborn, but at least they would have a consciousness. If they did not kill ruthlessly, not only would they die, but they would also drag everyone down. In fact, Their ability to accept things was much better than Tang En's. After all, the environment that Tang En used to live in was still considered a legal society, so when he transmigrated to become an assassin, it was very difficult for him to change his mindset. And the other world was a place where the strong preyed on the weak. Those with bigger fists and more people were the ones above the rest. These members only lacked a real experience. As long as they had this first time, it would be much better in the future. Boss, that soldier has been buried, and the others have been thrown up the mountain. David walked over and said, "Okay." Tang En nodded. Since this swordsman team had been eliminated, they would definitely be discovered. The only difference was that it was a matter of time before they were discovered. After dealing with these traces, they would at least be able to make them hesitate. "Then, shall we go now?" "Go? The food is already cooked. How can we not eat it?" Tang En walked to the bonfire and picked up the roasted pigeon that had fallen on the ground. After eating and taking some food, Tang En continued to lead the members of the gray space to the west. Due to the complicated terrain, there were not many checkpoints that they had to go through like just now. Tang En and the others deliberately chose remote paths and bypassed 3 lines of defense over the mountains. Finally, they had a short rest in a more secluded ravine. In the open space in the mountains, all kinds of colorful tents were scattered. Some were sewn with coarse cloth, some were military style, and some were pieced together with old clothes. Under the illumination of the fire, they looked like bright mushrooms from afar. A girl in a white robe walked among them, as if she was looking for something. From time to time, she would gesture to some people, but most of the answers she received were shaking her head. The girl tilted her head and seemed to be puzzled. Then, as if she saw something, she ran forward. "Auntie, let me help you." There, an old woman was struggling to move something in a bucket. This young girl didn't seem to be good at this kind of work, but relying on her young age, she still shakily lifted it up. The old woman kept thanking him as she supported him. Finally, the two of them worked together to move the wooden barrel into a small, old, gray tent. Auntie, you live alone? Is there no one else in the house?" The girl wiped the sweat off her forehead and asked as she looked inside. "Oh, I used to have 2 children. They both died in battle." The old woman's tone was calm. Then, she smiled and said, "Thank you so much for just now, little girl." I'm sorry." Perhaps because she knew that she had asked something she shouldn't have, the girl's expression was a little sad and awkward. It's nothing. It's been a long time. Besides, I have someone to take care of me now. Look, this bucket is filled with food." The old woman waved her hand carelessly. Her face was filled with calmness after the passage of time. The young girl pursed her lips and changed the topic. "Auntie, can I ask you a question?" "Of course." "Well, have you seen a young man? He looks ordinary." "Oh, his eyes are very thin and long. His name is Tang En. He should be living with you." "Tang En? I haven't heard of him." The old woman thought for a while and finally shook her head. "Oh, thank you." Then, the young girl held the old woman's hand and chatted for a while. Finally, they waved goodbye and walked out of the tent. Strange, where did he go? Could it be? The young girl thought of the old woman's hesitant expression and shook her head firmly. "No, Tang is so powerful. How could something happen to him?" "Yes, nothing will happen to him." "Josiah." "Yes." The young girl turned her head and said in surprise, "Leader Luo Sha." In the distance, Luo Sha walked over with a group of people. The simple man with a sword followed behind her like a shadow. I said, "Call me Aunt Luo Sha." Just now, that was old woman Megan. She has been in the Grey Coat Army for more than 10 years. I still remember that she has 2 sons. Unfortunately, a few years ago. Well, come with me. Okay. Josiah nodded and walked beside Luo Sha. "How is it? Are you used to it?" "It's very good. I like it here." "That's good." Luo Sha smiled and nodded. "I was worried that you would not be used to it because you were born in a noble family." Well, you are very similar to me in the past. Am I? Josiah lowered his head in embarrassment. I am not as powerful as leader, Auntie. Powerful? Haha. Luo Sha shook her head. When I was your age, I was a naive noble lady who only knew beautiful clothes and lively gatherings. Later, something happened in my family and I gradually became more sensible. There are still some nobles in the Grey Coat Army. For example, you know Borg. But you are the only one who joined the Grey Coat Army with a noble title, and you are also a magician. Haha, I couldn't believe it when I first heard it. I just want to do something for the civilians. It's too unfair now. Josiah lowered his head and murmured. Haha, that's the key. Luo Sha smiled appreciatively. It's unfair. The purpose of our team is to oppose the excessive power of the noble class. But gradually, we have developed and realized that all aspects of management still need to be managed by the nobles who have received a complete education. For example, I heard that you recently came up with an idea in the publicity department. Let us do our own printing, and then print our detailed opinions and secretly distribute them in the big cities. This is a very good and feasible idea, but others just can't think of it. But this is also the goal we are fighting for. At least, we should give the civilians equal opportunity to receive education. Auntie Luo Sha, we will succeed. Josiah's tone was firm, and then he blinked shyly. But the idea of printing things was not mine. It was Dun's. He said it was called a big poster. A big poster? Josiah nodded. Yes. By the way, Auntie Luo Sha, do you know where Dun went? Dun. Luo Sha thought for a moment and said, he should have retreated with everyone. But I can't find him here. I see. Luo Sha turned her head and said, go and find out where the gray space team is now. Yes. A young man behind her nodded and retreated. Josiah was happy to see this and said, thank you, Auntie Luo Sha. Haha, it's nothing. You care about Dun so much. Well, do you like him? Luo Sha suddenly laughed. No, it's not like that. I just... Josiah's beautiful face suddenly turned red, and his fingers pinched the corner of his clothes hard. He stammered. Haha. Luo Sha saw Josiah's panic, and could not help but laugh. I'm just teasing you, haha. Come, let's go to the wounded area together. Then Luo Sha took Josiah to see the wounded soldiers first, and said some words of comfort and encouragement. Then they went to the logistics department to check the food reserves, and then the temporary camp's security work. 2 hours later, the group returned to the tent where Luo Sha worked. It was a special time now, so there were a few people in front of the tent. One of them stepped forward and bowed. Leader, old General Omeng and a few ministers are waiting for you inside. Well, I know, thank you. Luo Sha nodded. Auntie Luo Sha, I'll go back first. These people naturally had important things to discuss with Leader Luo Sha, so Josiah asked to leave. It's okay, you come in too. Luo Sha pulled him into the tent. Leader. The few people who were discussing things inside stood up and said, you guys are like this again. Luo Sha looked helpless and asked everyone to sit down. Although Luo Sha did not seem to care, everyone waited for her to sit down before they sat down. Josiah stood behind Luo Sha. As for the simple-looking man holding the sword, he found a corner and sat down with his eyes closed. Leader, old General Omeng handed over a stack of papers and said, this is the number of casualties of our soldiers. Sigh, I didn't command well. It was no wonder he said that. Last night, when they broke through the encirclement of the Grey Flame Army, although they had the advantage in numbers, they did not gain any advantage in battle. Old General Omeng, don't worry, we are not good at this kind of direct battle. This kind of result is expected. Bosco stood up and comforted him. This was true. Whether it was individual quality or equipment, the difference between the soldiers of the Grey Coat Army and the regular army was obvious. This was not something that could be made up with willpower alone. Luo Sha's face was a little sad. She took a deep breath and said, "They are all brave martyrs. Comfort their families and let them rest assured that we will not forget their sacrifice." "Leader, don't worry, this is already being done." "Okay." Luo Sha's face relaxed. "Leader." Another minister stood up and said, "The evacuation work has begun. According to our marching route, there will be a few hundred villages along the way. It is enough to arrange for the families to follow the team." Naturally, there were villages and towns in the 100,000 mountains. People like miners and gold miners would rest here. The headquarters of the Grey Coat Army was located here because of the complicated terrain. Secondly, it was because they had been operating here for many years and had a good reputation. It was not a big problem to arrange for some civilians to enter the villages. After all, this was an encirclement of 3 major armies. The Grey Coat Army could not bring these civilians to risk their lives. That's good. Remember, this must be done well. There is no room for any mistakes. We can't let our soldiers have to worry about their families while they are risking their lives in the front line, Luo Sha said with a serious expression. "Yes, I will do it personally." "Okay, thank you." At this moment, a young man walked in. Josiah's expression changed. This person was the one who went to investigate the whereabouts of the Gray Space Team. The young man bowed to everyone and said, "Leader, the Gray Space Team went to the east to meet up with the team last night." "East? Team?" Luo Sha frowned. "There haven't been any teams coming over recently. Besides, the Gray Space Team reports to me directly. Why would they go to meet up with the team?" "It was an order from Commander Bull from the Tactical Department. He said it was a mistake in the chaos last night. It was too late to chase after them." Josiah covered his mouth and screamed. His face was pale. "What?" Luo Sha, Omen, and Bosco suddenly stood up. Their faces were filled with anger. "Mistake?" Luo Sha's face was cold. "You mean, one mistake in our hero. If Tang Yin's team had not discovered the Grey Flame Army in advance, the Grey Coat Army's losses would not be as small as they were now. But now, because of a mistake, they had gone to the east. Everyone knew the situation there. As they broke through the encirclement, the east was the enemy's rear. The danger there was self-evident. To put it more realistically, Tang Yin's team was dead meat. Sigh. I remember this kid. What a pity, what a pity! Omen could not help but shake his head. Other than Josiah, who was already stunned, Luo Sha's feelings were the most complicated. Tang Yin's role was not only in combat. That idiot! Bosco slammed the table angrily. He did not have any negative feelings towards Tang Yin. He did not tell him what Borg and Bull had done. So in his heart, Tang Yin was the hero who had first discovered the enemy. He called him an idiot, of course, because of Bull's mistake. Pass down the order. Bull will be demoted by 1 level. Then, that's it for now. Luo Sha sighed, looking a little helpless. It had already happened. Of course, they had to investigate. But this was it. Well, that was it. The situation last night was indeed chaotic. Mistakes were inevitable. Plus, it was a special time. Luo Sha would not cut off his own arm and remove Bull's command. Wah! At this time, Josiah suddenly squatted down and cried. This strong girl could not control herself and shed tears in front of everyone. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 171. The next day, the sun had just risen. Tang Yin stood at the top of the mountain. The night wind that had yet to dissipate cut his cheeks like a knife, and the smell of the trees in the dusk came along with it. Looking to the west, he couldn't help but let out a long sigh. They couldn't go to the east, but could they definitely go to the west? There was still a checkpoint in the west, and there was also an army. The swordsman team that was destroyed must have attracted attention now. Maybe the only thing that was slightly better was that there was a glimmer of hope in the west. This glimmer of hope was to break through the blockade and then pray that they wouldn't encounter an army. At that time, they would hide in all kinds of barren hills and rivers and come out after the encirclement. However, it was easier said than done. Thinking of this, Tang En shook his head. The power of the human wave tactic was huge. They were now like a fish with a big net behind them and countless small nets in front of them. Once they were caught, they would definitely die. Boss, catch! Turning sideways, he turned his head and stretched out his left hand to grab a dry, hard flatbread. David climbed to the top of the mountain with his hands and feet and laughed. Everyone is up. Shall we continue to go west? Yes, continue to go west. Tang En took a bite of the tasteless flatbread and chewed a few times. David, have you ever thought that we won't be able to get out this time? I haven't thought about it. Why should I think about it? Just follow, boss. David didn't seem to be worried at all. Ha! Tang En laughed and didn't say anything more. However, David's words still made him feel a little emotional. Yes, he was no longer a lone ranger, but a team leader. Yes, this time, he must bring them back. After a simple breakfast, the group continued to shuttle through the mountains and forests. Do you see the terrain here? This is more suitable for a one-on-one ambush. Look, that's the best hiding place. Learn to observe all kinds of things around you, because they are all weapons. Come, I'll teach you how to make a crossbow. Look here, hey! What's wrong, boss? Don't make a sound, there's a pheasant. Although they were on the run, Tang En didn't forget to continue to teach them all kinds of killing knowledge. Because no one knew which one of these could save one's life. The journey in the morning was very smooth, and they didn't encounter any checkpoints that they had to break through. During lunch, Tang En showed off his cooking skills and cooked beggar's chicken. For a team with only a dozen people, Tang En was confident that he could solve the food problem. As long as they could find living creatures, there would be no shortage of meat dishes. Guizhi doesn't count. David, what are you looking at? You've been distracted since noon. Hey boss, I'm looking for a pheasant. The beggar's chicken is so delicious. David licked his lips and swallowed his saliva. This guy. Tang En rolled his eyes and walked up the hill. Boss, what's that? David, who was looking around after reaching the top of the mountain, suddenly asked. Tang En turned around. In the distance, a black dot that looked like a line was slowly moving between the towering mountains and steep ridges. Damn it, sooner or later I'll have to get the binoculars. Even Tang En can't see from such a distance. Luke, can you see it? I can't see it clearly, but it looks like a car. Luke said hesitantly. A car? Tang En blinked and suddenly had an idea. Then, he narrowed his eyes and asked, Do you want to play something big? What game? Tang En didn't answer immediately. He simply said, Let's go and find a checkpoint first in the 100,000 mountains. As long as they followed the path, it would be much easier to find a checkpoint than wild animals. Boss, what do you think about this one? No, the terrain isn't steep enough. It's easy to get us killed. We won't make a loss. What about this one? It's steep, but there aren't any trees. Let's look again. Okay, this is it. Remember, we'll follow the old rules. I'll ambush you first. I already told you the rest last night. You can think about it yourselves. They were in an environment where a mountain road was sandwiched between two low hills. Although the terrain wasn't high enough, there were still plenty of trees around, which was the perfect place for Tang En to carry out his plan. The 20 or so soldiers below were all holding sabers. Judging from the style of their armor, they weren't regular soldiers. As for which lord they belonged to, there was no telling. A sneak attack in broad daylight naturally wouldn't be as effective as at night. So, the first person Tang En looked for was someone who looked like a squad leader. At the very least, he had to be of some value. Given his current strength, as long as he targeted these ordinary soldiers, it would be a predetermined position in front of the God of Light. Falling rapidly from the sky, the squad leader only had time to raise his head before a dagger pierced his forehead. Pooh, kill. Tang En roared and stepped on the squad leader's body, knocking down a group of dumbfounded soldiers. Swoosh, Lin Zhong was the first to throw out a dagger, which hit a soldier between the eyebrows. Beautiful, Tang En praised. He wasn't referring to the technique, but to the fact that Luke had finally thrown away the shackles in his heart. Enemy attack. Finally, a soldier came back to his senses and shouted subconsciously. Why are you shouting? This is the middle of nowhere. Tang En glided over to the soldier who had shouted the warning. It wasn't time to eat, so the soldiers naturally had their weapons with them. But what difference did that make to Tang En? At that moment, the members of the Gray Space jumped out of the forest and went straight for their chosen opponent. After taking care of the two soldiers, Tang En didn't attack again. Instead, he began to pay attention to the situation on the battlefield. After the lesson last night, everyone's performance was passable this time. Their attacks were basically aimed at the vital points, and they were much more decisive. These soldiers were a little confused. They had only received orders to guard the road and not let the supply route be blocked. They didn't know that this group of murderous gods was loitering around. After a short exchange, they were caught off guard. Tang En casually took care of a soldier who had rushed at him. He shouted, "Try to attack the vital points. Don't make blood stains. It'll be hard to clean up later." Bang! As soon as he finished speaking, a soldier's head was directly blown off by a heavy sword. Instantly, yellow and white blood splattered everywhere. F***CK, David, don't attack. Watch from the side. Hee. David scratched his head embarrassedly. With Tang En's support, the battle ended quickly. Not long after, the 20 or so soldiers were all lying in pools of blood. Almost every member of the Gray Space had lost a life in this battle. They looked at the soldiers lying at their feet in a daze. Was this killing? It didn't seem too difficult. Don't just stand there. Get moving. You, clean up the scene for me. Find some soil to cover up the blood stains. David, you take some people to cut down trees a little further away. Michaud, you go and make the equipment. Luke, go and make a bow and make some arrows. Tang En issued several orders in one breath and hurried everyone to quickly set up the equipment. Surround me? F***CK. If I don't show you what I'm made of, you'll think I'm a fake. If you like this work, you're welcome to vote for it at Chidian. Com. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 172. Clatter, clatter, clatter. The sound of heavy horse hooves could be heard. Dozens of fully loaded carriages covered in oilcloth were moving slowly on the mountain road. The road was rugged, so it was very difficult to travel. When they encountered potholes, they needed someone to push them from behind. This made the soldiers complain incessantly in their hearts. Everyone, hold on a little longer. We'll rest after a while. A person who looked like a captain shouted from the front. Yes. The soldier responded weakly, but he kept cursing in his heart. Damn, it's easy for you to say. If you have the ability, get off the horse and push us. Needless to say, it was obvious that this was a small transport team delivering supplies to the army in front. The roads in the 100,000 mountains were known to be complicated and difficult to travel. Under such circumstances, transporting supplies was undoubtedly difficult. Therefore, the rear of the military simply sent a large number of soldiers to guard the road and then sent out the supplies separately. This way, the transportation would not be obstructed because of blockages along the way. Moreover, no matter how many twists and turns the mountain road was, they would eventually arrive. The only difference was that they would arrive a day earlier or later. Captain. The soldier in front was stunned for a moment and suddenly called out. What's wrong? The captain urged his horse forward and asked. Because there were soldiers at checkpoints every few kilometers, there was no need to send any scouts. The captain was also stunned when he came over. This is more than 1,000 meters in front of them, a building about 10 meters tall that looked like an arch rose from the ground. From afar, it looked like a towering mountain stronghold. This is a checkpoint? Which idiot came up with this idea? Don't they have anything else to do? Indeed, to have such a solemn attitude in this desolate mountain range was really a pain in the ass feeling of having nothing better to do. As the transport team gradually approached, the arched building became more and more clear. The entire building was made of wood. Below it were 10 or so thick logs used to support it. Above it were layers of short logs, as if to make something like a watchtower. The soldiers raised their heads and looked at the towering building, a little stunned. There's no door yet. What's the point of making this? Some of the soldiers with sharp eyes noticed that the arched building was empty in the middle. There was no cover at all. Even if you were bored and wanted to make a defensive bunker, you should at least build a door or something. Otherwise, wouldn't the defense be zero? Isn't there a barricade? Maybe the main gate hasn't been built yet. Hey, do you think these guys were carpenters before they joined the army? Haha, that's very likely. With this joyful mood, the transport team arrived a few dozen meters away from the building. At this time, 7 or 8 plate-armored soldiers came out to greet them. So they are the Lord's soldiers. No wonder they are so weird. This plate armor style. It's Lord Hogan's, right? Don't you think this building is a little unstable? Why do I feel like it's going to collapse? Baba, you jinx, shut up. The guards walked over and saluted the captain who was sitting on the horse. Haha, I say, brothers. The captain waved his hand and laughed. What are you guys doing? Building a castle? Haha. The soldiers behind him couldn't help but laugh. Hee hee. The guard who looked like a captain also revealed an embarrassed smile on his face, looking rather embarrassed. Sorry for making a fool of myself, sir. This is just us brothers fooling around. I see. The captain smiled and then asked, Why are there only a few of you? Where are the others? The guards were in groups of 20, and there were only 7 or 8 of them in front of him. There are still some brothers who went to cut down trees. The captain scratched his head and said embarrassedly. The captain opened his mouth and was a little speechless. So this group of weird soldiers wanted to build this project successfully. After all, they weren't his soldiers, so he couldn't say much. So the captain just curled his lips and waved his hand behind him. Bring over the provisions of our brothers. The soldiers guarding the checkpoint naturally needed to eat and drink. Although they brought military provisions when they set out, it was only for a day's worth of provisions. The rest of the provisions were provided by the transport team along the way. Thank you, thank you. We wouldn't dare to trouble you. We will do it ourselves, After nodding and bowing, the captain asked the soldiers behind him to move forward. At least they know how to behave. The captain chuckled and didn't object. Naturally, there wasn't much for 20 people to eat and drink. Even if it was 3 days of ration, there were only a few bags. Gasp. The captain who was directing the transportation suddenly had a change in expression. He took a few deep breaths and then looked at the carriage behind him. This is olive oil. Why, brother, do you want it? The captain's exaggerated behavior naturally attracted the attention of the people around him, and a soldier curled his lips and laughed. I want it. I haven't had any oil in my stomach for a few days. The captain smiled fawningly and took advantage of the situation. That soldier looked at the captain in front of him. These were supplies for the army, so he didn't dare to touch them. The captain looked at the fawning soldier and felt a sense of superiority. He waved his hand carelessly. Give them a bucket. Thank you. The captain's face was full of excitement, and his ordinary face was full of smiles. What are you waiting for? Hurry up and move the barricades away. The captain ran back with a bucket of olive oil and loudly shouted at his soldiers to move the barricade. Then, he said with a fawning face, Please, The captain laughed heartily, and his face was full of self-satisfaction. With a wave of his hand, the transportation team slowly entered the circular arched door. Behind the arched door, there were many wooden planks and branches on both sides of the mountain road. Needless to say, these were definitely used for construction. Please, please. The captain held the oil bucket and bowed continuously. As a soldier, he naturally had some courage. Seeing that the captain was so spineless, the soldiers in the transportation team couldn't help but smile contemptuously and didn't even look at him. So, no one noticed that the captain's fawning smile had turned into a smile of a weasel looking at a chicken entering the nest. When the team was halfway through, the captain straightened his back. The smile on his face didn't fade, and his long and narrow eyes narrowed, and he suddenly shouted, "Do it!" As soon as he finished speaking, the captain stepped on the ground and instantly jumped onto the roof of the carriage. The oil bucket in his hand was opened at some point, and the yellow liquid was lightly dripping onto the oilcloth. Then, his figure flashed and he was on another carriage. Ha ha! Break for me! At this time, a strong soldier beside the arched door raised his heavy sword and instantly chopped down on a thick piece of wood. Bang! The sword cut through the wood, and the 10-meter-tall arched door made creaking sounds and swayed left and right. Break for me again! He raised his heavy sword again. Bang! Another thick piece of wood broke. Then, he took off his sword and left, not waiting to see the result. Creak! The huge arched door behind him couldn't support it anymore, and the wood began to roll down with a rumbling sound. Everything happened in an instant. The soldiers looked at the scene in front of them in a daze, and they couldn't come back to their senses. What were they doing? They weren't satisfied with the construction, so they wanted to tear it down? Before the wood on this side fell to the ground, a large number of trees rolled down from both sides of the mound. The front and back were completely blocked. The warhorses neighed and raised their front hooves in fright at the scene in front of them. Bang! The captain, who was in a daze, was directly thrown to the ground. However, this also woke him up. Ignoring the pain in his body, he got up and shouted, "Enemy attack! There's something wrong with this group of soldiers. Kill them!" Boom! 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 As soon as he finished speaking, the 10-meter-tall wood finally came crashing down. Bang! 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 The carriages fell apart, and wood splinters flew everywhere. The soldiers below couldn't react in time and were smashed. Their screams shook the sky as they wailed. With such a height and such a weight, as long as they crashed into it, no matter how thick their armor was, they would be directly crushed. Kill them! Only the soldiers in the middle were smashed, so the soldiers in the front and back pulled out their weapons and looked around with murderous intent. Where are they? At this time, except for the one who was still jumping on the carriages, the other soldiers had disappeared. On the mound. The only place where they could hide was the mound with lush trees on both sides. However, before they could rush up, they saw flames falling down. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. More than a dozen fire arrows flew over their heads, and the burning wooden planks between them were directly smashed down. The arrows were not dense, but the effect was not small. After landing on the tarps, a fire immediately spread. Not good. The captain looked at the burning supplies, and in an instant, his heart stopped beating for a few seconds. Then, he suddenly let out an inhuman scream. Put out the fire. He was the highest officer in the transport team. If the supplies were damaged in the slightest, he wouldn't even need to be put on trial. He would be hanged directly. Put out the fire, put out the fire. Damn it, kill the man who poured the olive oil. Looking at the tarps that were about to catch fire, the captain wanted to slap himself. He had felt superior just now and given the olive oil to the man, but in the end, he had become an accomplice in this fire. Ha ha! With a long laugh, the figure who had already jumped over dozens of carriages suddenly jumped up and stepped on the oil barrel in the air. He took advantage of the momentum to float to the mound on the side of the road, and the oil barrel smashed directly at the captain. Bang! The exasperated captain cut the oil barrel into pieces with his sword, but then some of the yellow fragrant liquid inside splashed on him. Whoosh whoosh, not good. The captain reacted quickly. He threw away his sword and quickly rolled on the ground. Although he was yellow and ugly, he had at least avoided the misfortune of being burned to death. Luke, ignore him. Our goal is to burn things, the figure who had landed on the mound quickly said. Yes, boss. The fire arrow moved again, and this time, it ignited the planks and branches scattered on the side of the road. Needless to say, these people were none other than Tang En and the members of the Gray Space. After confirming that it was the supply team on the hilltop, he had come up with this plan to burn the supplies. The seemingly majestic giant arch was, in fact, just a piece of tofu dregs. The only thing that could support it were a few tree trunks. As long as 2 of them were broken, the gate would collapse. As for the rolling logs that fell from above, they weren't just to hurt the enemy, but also to ignite the fire. So, the fire in the middle of the transport team was the fiercest. Also, the supplies were all buried under the burning logs and couldn't be rescued even if they wanted to. David, smash that carriage. There's olive oil inside. Okay. A piece of burning wood was thrown down. The target was too big and David didn't miss. Whoosh! The fire in front of the team instantly soared into the sky, and the soldiers on the side were so frightened that they kept retreating. Ha ha! Everybody burst into laughter on the mound. At that moment, there were the neighs of panicked horses, the wails of injured soldiers, and the cries for help to put out the fire and so on. It was like a feast. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 173. The fire on the mountain path continued to grow with the wood as a carrier. Coupled with the howling cold wind from the north, the fire spread even wider in a short while. Get a few teams, kill them for me. The captain, who was in a panic because of the burning of the supplies, finally came to his senses and ordered the soldiers to destroy Tang En, the source of the fire. As soon as he finished speaking, more than 100 soldiers swarmed toward the mound. Shoot the wooden planks. Tang En picked up the flexible bough and lit the bough wrapped in firewood in the fire pit. Then, he shot an arrow at the wooden planks and branches on the side of the road. Then, more than a dozen arrows were shot in succession. Whoosh whoosh. The flammable branches were the first to be ignited, and a wall of fire half the height of a person rose. The soldiers who rushed over suddenly stopped and looked at the fire in front of them hesitantly. In fact, although the wall of fire was formed at this time, it was not very strong. They could still rush over without any injuries, but these scorching flames swallowed their courage. Shoot the carriage behind. Seeing that the wall of fire stopped these soldiers for a while, Tang En ordered everyone to shoot at the rear half of the team, where the fire was not very big. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. More than a dozen arrows instantly bit the tarpaulin of the carriage behind. Quickly move the carriage away. Seeing this, the captain panicked and hurriedly roared. Captain, we can't move, there are logs blocking the back. The captain, who was burning with anxiety, forgot that the front and back of the team were blocked just now. Damn it, move those logs. This was undoubtedly a stupid way, but it was the only way at the moment. In an instant, more than 100 soldiers surrounded them and tried their best to move, but the effect was not good. Because the logs that rolled down from the mound were mostly thick, and some were so thick that 2 people could not even hug them. The soldiers who were blocked by the wall of fire came up with a solution at this time. They were using long-distance spears to pry open the burning wooden planks and branches one by one. Don't shoot arrows, quick, smash down all the burning wooden planks here. Tang En wiped the sweat on his forehead and said. Next to everyone, there was a burning fire pit. The arrows they shot before were all ignited here. At this time, there were more than a dozen burning wooden planks inside. Smash! Tang En took the lead and threw out the flaming wooden plank. Whoosh, 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 bang, bang, bang. With a whistling sound, large pieces of burning planks were smashed down. The fire in the entire convoy grew fiercely under the desperate eyes of the soldiers. Retreat! After delivering the last gift, Tang En ordered. The members of the gray space turned around and ran without hesitation. According to Boss's words, he had taken enough advantage. If he didn't leave now, it would be easy for him to lose himself. Kill! At this moment, the soldiers finally broke through the wall of fire and rushed towards the mound. But at this time, Tang En and the others had already reached the top of the mound. He turned around and looked at the soldiers who were rushing over like a tidal wave. He waved his hand and said, "Haha, there's no need to send me off. Let's hurry back and put out the fire before it's too late." After leaving these sincere words, Tang En disappeared behind the mountain. The soldiers gritted their teeth and tried their best to catch up with him. Over there! At this time, Tang En and his group had already slid to the bottom of the mound and walked into a small patch of dense forest. Chase! Wait, don't chase. A soldier captain shook his head and said bitterly, "It's useless. We can't catch up. They're more familiar with this area than we are." This was the truth. Since the other party dared to attack, of course they had set up a retreat route. If they followed closely, there was still value in catching up. But now that the distance between the two sides was obvious, it was obvious that there was no chance. "Let's go back and save. Damn it." Probably thinking of Tang En's last words, the soldier captain couldn't help but curse angrily. Although Tang En and the others were driven away, the fire was still burning fiercely. They shouted for a long time to put out the fire, but in fact the effect was minimal. It wasn't that the soldiers didn't work hard. After all, this was a matter of honor and life. But the key was that there was no way, there wasn't any water in this desolate place. They could use soil to cover it, but they lacked tools. They couldn't hold it with their hands. So everyone looked at the raging fire in front of them and was a little confused. Of course, there was more than one supply transport team. In fact, in this Shirwan Mountains there were at least dozens of small transport teams like this one heading west. Tang En and the others' ultimate goal was still the west, but the choice of the route was indeed uncertain. It seemed that they were walking very casually. Of course, it wasn't that they didn't care. They just wanted to disrupt the line of sight of the pursuers behind them. Walking in such a large area, there was naturally a probability of encountering those supply teams. There were no mobile phones in this strange world. The communication methods were relatively backward. Generally, they relied on manual labor or animals such as carrier pigeons. In this case, the transmission of information was very slow. For example, Tang En and the others destroyed the checkpoint team last night. But in the afternoon of the second day, the burned supply transport team was not vigilant at all. Obviously, they didn't know that there would be danger in this heavily guarded area. At the same time, the other transport teams should not know about this either. With the first successful experience, the gray space was much more familiar with setting fire to this place. In one afternoon, they happened to encounter 3 supply teams. Except for one of them who gave up because there was no suitable terrain for them to attack, the other 2 were taken down by the gray space with the old method. According to David's words, the fire was more satisfying than eating beggar's chicken. At night, Tang En and the others were looking for a place to rest, but they encountered another team. This was even easier. Except for a few people standing guard at the campsite, no one was even sent out to patrol. With such a loose defense, Tang En and the others naturally wouldn't let go of such a loose defense. After quietly getting rid of the few soldiers standing guard, De Ming took their campfire and their olive oil and burned it. It was not until the fire on the supplies was completely ignited that the soldiers realized it. At this time, it was of course a fantasy to want to save them. Inspired by this, Tang En and the rest did not sleep for the entire night. they ran all over the mountains, searching for traces of the supply team. These traces were actually easy to find. These fully loaded carriages would always leave deep wheel marks on the mountain road. That night they found a total of 12 campsites. Although 3 of them were in safe places, the campsites were still well organized. In this case, Tang En and the others had no choice but to avoid them. As for the other 9 careless campsites, the results were needless to say. On this night, Tang En led the members of the Gray Space to become evil spirits who loved to set fire. They came quietly and left quietly. With a wave of their sleeves, they left behind a big fire. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 174. The weather in the north was as complicated as the terrain. The warm sun from 2 days ago had disappeared and was replaced by dark clouds. After a whole day of preparation, the rain finally fell at noon the next day. At this time, the 6th encirclement of the Bran Kingdom was still ongoing. Compared to the previous 5 times, this encirclement was obviously better. Although there were no great results, at least they were chasing after the main force of the Grey Coat Army. It wasn't like the previous few times, where they chased after scattered groups all over the mountains and plains, only to realize that they had disappeared as they chased after them. It would be best if they could only leave it as it was. In the open space between the mountains, the soldiers of the 3 armies were taking a short break. Ralph and the others were all experts in using soldiers. They knew how to take a break. Therefore, they did not let the soldiers chase after the Grey Coat Army day and night. They maintained a constant speed and followed behind the Grey Coat Army. Because they were only taking a break, other than the main tent, the other soldiers did not set up their tents. All the soldiers lowered their heads to avoid the rain. Some took the time to take a nap, and some took out their rations to eat. At this time, a shrill sound was heard. Enemy attack! Enemy attack! Be alert! Splash! Water splashed everywhere. The soldiers on the ground quickly got up. The shield soldiers immediately formed a square formation. The light armored soldiers ran to the back to hide, and the archers began to gather. From this short moment of reaction, perhaps you could understand why the fierce and barbaric people of the northern wilderness had not succeeded in conquering the north of the Bran. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. At this time, a large number of arrows suddenly shot out from the dense forest beside the open space. Mixed with the rain, the arrows fell on the soldiers' heads. Bang, bang, bang. Most of the arrows were blocked by the shield. Of course, some of the soldiers were not able to react in time. Some of them were slightly slower and were directly nailed to the ground. The blood on the ground was instantly diluted by the rain. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. After the first round of arrow rain, there was a pause. The second and third rounds of arrow rain came in the blink of an eye. However, the effect of these 2 rounds of arrow rain was almost negligible. The soldiers of the 3 armies were all experienced on the battlefield. Any small gap would be taken advantage of by them. Motherf *Ker, here they come again. Soldiers on the left and right, listen to my orders, attack and surround them. Archers, listen to my orders. Head towards the northwest. Suppress them for me. A majestic man walked out of the tent and roared furiously. As soon as he finished speaking, the spearmen on the left and right flanks rushed out like a long dragon without hesitation. They quickly surrounded the forest. At the same time, a large number of arrows were shot back into the dense forest, and the sound of trees hitting leaves could be heard. However, at this time, the attacks in the dense forest had disappeared. After the rain of arrows from the soldiers entered, there were no screams or groans. Not long after, the attacking soldiers walked out of the dense forest. The captains and officers at the front all shrugged helplessly, indicating that there was no one inside. Seeing this, the big man's face darkened. Scout team, expand the search area. Also, increase the security. After saying this, He angrily lifted the curtain and walked into the tent. The tent was quite large, and there were quite a few people gathered there. At this time, most of them were surrounding the map and discussing. In the east there were 2 generals in high-grade armor. "How was it, General Baylor?" a middle-aged general with a gloomy expression asked. "Motherf *Ker, what else could it be? They ran away." The big man sat down gloomily. He grabbed the water bottle on the table and took a big gulp. "These gray coat army. Sigh, we can't underestimate them." These 3 generals were naturally Ralph, Baylor, and Gary. The gray coat army's numbers exceeded their expectations. This caused the 3 generals to gather together to pursue and attack. Although the number of people on both sides was about the same, there was no need to doubt the strength of the regular army. Therefore, Baylor and the others weren't worried that they couldn't win. The problem now was that they didn't even have a chance to fight. Ever since the Gray Coat Army broke through the encirclement of the Blue Flame Army, they hadn't fought them head-on. Take note, it was head-on. The Gray Coat Army's daily sneak attacks and harassment didn't stop. Originally, when the army advanced, there would be scouts scouting ahead. Under normal circumstances, this would eliminate the possibility of a sneak attack. But where was this? This was the 100,000 Mountains. The various strange terrains made the scouts feel helpless even if they wanted to. For example, there was a steep mountain peak in front. Before the scouts could climb up, the troops behind had arrived. Then, a large number of arrows rained down from above. Another example was passing through a large forest. At this time, no matter how many scouts there were, it was inevitable that they would overlook something. Then, when the army passed by, of course, there would be another rain of arrows. Although this situation didn't cause much damage after they were deliberately on guard. However, if this continued, it would undoubtedly affect the morale of the soldiers. It wasn't that Baylor and the others hadn't thought of luring out these sneak attacks. However, the other party always used longbow soldiers and only released 3 rounds of arrow rain at most. Then, no matter how good the opportunity was, they would decisively retreat. If they didn't eat the bait, they naturally wouldn't be able to catch it. They had the elite soldiers of the 3 armies, but they couldn't do anything. Baylor and the others were rather depressed now. "Just wait." Ralph sat at the side for a long time and finally said something. Although it was a little confusing, the other 2 could understand. "Phew." Baylor let out a long breath. "That's right. We'll let them be arrogant for 2 more days. When the feudal lord soldiers are in place, I'll show them what the brand's official army is like." The feudal lord soldiers. "I'm afraid they won't be useful." Gary seemed rather disdainful. "There's no need for them to be useful," Baylor said carelessly. "As long as they can reach the designated location in the stipulated time and block the path of the Gray Coat Army. TSK. Even if there are more than 20,000 pigs, it will take a while to kill them. There's enough time for us to arrive." "Humph." Gary snorted through his nose, but he didn't object to Baylor's words. When they first found out that the main force of the Gray Coat Army was in the valley, the 3 armies directly came to encircle and annihilate them. As for the soldiers of the 4 feudal lords, they were arranged to guard the periphery and do nothing. Who would have expected that in the end, the Gray Coat Army would forcefully break through from the west? The encirclement battle became a long-term pursuit battle. Baylor and the others then thought of the feudal lord's soldiers. At that time, only feudal Lord Solomon's soldiers were guarding the west. They definitely wouldn't be able to stop them. The 3 generals discussed and simply let them continue to retreat. Then, they sent out scouts to inform the feudal lords in the other directions to continuously draw closer to Solomon. Actually, the 3 armies were now camping on time and eating on time. It seemed like they were chasing at a steady pace, but in reality it was also a kind of strategy. They were driving the Gray Coat Army's rhythm of escape. Currently, it seemed that this strategy was effective. The Gray Coat Army wasn't desperately hurrying on with their journey. Instead, they spent some effort on these continuous sneak attacks. This way, as long as the soldiers of the three feudal lords traveled a little more every day, they would eventually overtake the Grey Coat army from the side and meet up with feudal Lord Solomon. As long as they blocked the path in front of the Grey Coat army. Baylor was right. Even if there were more than 20,000 pigs blocking a path, it would still take a lot of effort to clear them out. At this moment, the curtains of the large tent were lifted, and a messenger entered. "General, this is an urgent letter from the military." The soldier was from the Thunderbolt's army, so he naturally passed the letter to Baylor. "Yes." Baylor nodded slightly and casually opened it. "Military? The supplies have been sent? When did those officials become so efficient?" Bang! Crash! His voice stopped, and the table fell apart. Baylor's palm stopped in midair, and his face was pitch black. The large tent instantly fell silent. Only the sound of raindrops hitting the roof could be heard. Everyone shifted their gaze over. "General Baylor?" Gary asked suspiciously. Crack. He stretched out his hand and clenched it tightly. Then, he retracted his hand, and his joints emitted explosive sounds. Baylor's chest rapidly panted a few times. "Idiot! Idiot! More than half of the supplies have been burned on the way." "What?" Gary was shocked and his eyes instantly widened. On the other side, Ralph, who was usually expressionless, was also astonished. The officers in the large tent were also shocked by this news. Then, they started to discuss it. In the end, the military did not dare to hide this news. In reality, this news could not be hidden. Otherwise, if the troops launched a general attack the next day, the supplies that had been sent today would not be enough to fill the stomachs of the soldiers. That would be a huge problem. How is that possible? After digesting this sentence, Gary instinctively shook his head. Isn't the supply team behind us? How could they have been burned bandits? That can't be. Do they have the guts? It says that it's the Grey Coat army. Gary looked at Baylor, and his tone was a little strange. What did you say, the Grey Coat army? Then what are we chasing after? At this moment, Ralph picked up the paper on the floor and frowned as he looked at it. It's a small unit from the Grey Coat army. It seems like there are only a dozen of them. How King embarrassing. Speaking up to this point, Baylor stretched out his hand again, but there was no table to hit. A dozen of them burned more than half of the supplies. Gary's expression was so gloomy that it seemed like water could drip from it. He roared in a low voice, "This is a disgrace to soldiers. They should be hanged directly." That's strange. Ralph looked at the letter and raised his head. Where did they come from? Naturally, he was talking about the dozen of them who burned the supplies. This was indeed a question. If the Grey Coat army had specially prepared a backup plan, they would not have sent such a small number of people. However, no matter how he thought about it, he would not have known that this was just a group of pitiful people who had been unjustly implicated. I don't care where they came from. Gary narrowed his eyes with a murderous look. I just want to know when they will die. It's raining, so they can't burn anything. The letter says that they have already sent an extermination team. They should be dead by now. After many years of fighting, Baylor had seen many storms and waves. At this moment, he finally suppressed his anger. Then, he smiled bitterly and shook his head. It's not a pity that this group of people died, but our plan, their supplies could not keep up. Their original plan to catch up with the Grey Coat army in these 2 days was naturally completely ruined. Someone order the scouts to immediately inform the Lord's soldiers and ask them to run forward for a while. As for the exact time of the attack, wait for us to inform them of the exact time. Baylor was also afraid of the group of idiots behind them. Before confirming the arrival of the supplies, he did not dare to set an exact time at all. Then, he thought about how he would have to endure a few more days of sneak attacks and harassment from the Grey Coat army because of this. he could not help but raise his head and sigh. Although the opponents who are like lions and tigers are frightening, these pigs, teammates who are worse than pigs, are the real scourge. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 175. Whoosh bang, a blue light shot up from the mountain and exploded when it reached a certain height. The falling raindrops were also blasted apart by the force of the impact. They were imprinted with a blue light, as if a piece of glass had been shattered. Soon, groups of people appeared and gathered at the foot of the steep mountain. Who released the signal flare? A low-ranking officer in chainmail ran over with a group of people and asked, I saw them go up the mountain. The soldier pointed at the towering peak in front of him. Haha, good, they're digging their own graves. The low-ranking officer glanced around and saw that no one was higher than him. He ordered, you and you, lead the team up with me. The rest of the people will surround the mountain. If there are more people coming from behind, let them guard the bottom. Yes. Let's go. After that, the low-ranking officer led more than 200 people to the mountain and spread out slightly to search the top of the mountain. Do you think they can kill that group of people? A soldier who stayed behind asked. There are so many people, it shouldn't be a problem. It's hard to say. A soldier shook his head, his face a little ugly. You don't know how powerful they are. It's been 2 days, these people are like ghosts, appearing and disappearing unpredictably. More than a dozen teams have already been destroyed by them. I saw with my own eyes a person with a red dagger destroy half a team in an instant and then break out of the encirclement. That scene, I don't dare to imagine. Hiss, so powerful. The soldier took a deep breath and then sighed. No wonder they can burn more than half of the supplies in one night. You know, more than a dozen captains have already been sent to the military court because of them. TSK, they probably won't be able to escape from the gallows. I know, I heard about it too. And this time, the armaments department is also anxious. It's said that whoever kills this group of people will be directly promoted to deputy commander. Otherwise, the officer just now was so agitated. Is it easy to get this military merit? It's gambling with our lives. We'd better be honest soldiers. At least if something happens, the responsibility won't fall on us. Yes, that makes sense. Okay, let's stop talking. They're now on the mountain and have nowhere to go. As long as we guard the mountain pass, they'll still die in the end. Yes, this mountain peak was much higher than the surrounding mountain ranges, but the area was not large. The 200 or so soldiers who entered the mountain spread out to search, forming 2 layers of encirclement. Search the trees and bushes carefully. Don't miss any corner. Don't attack blindly. The low-ranking officer drew his saber and shouted. As soon as he finished speaking, screams and the sound of weapons clashing could be heard from the side. It seemed a little chaotic. Enemy attack! Don't panic, guard your positions. While shouting, the low-ranking officer led his men to the scene of the incident. However, by the time he arrived, the battle had already ended. 3 soldiers lay motionless on the ground, while the other 7 or 8 people retreated to the side in panic. Where is he? They ran away. He suddenly jumped down from the tree and attacked. These 3 brothers are dead meat. Yes. The low-ranking officer nodded. Instead of being shocked, he was delighted. Sure enough, on this mountain peak, a cornered dog would jump over the wall. Were they going all out? Enemy attack. Suddenly, a similar warning came from the other side. Continue searching. After saying this, the low-ranking officer led his men and rushed over again. Enemy attack! Enemy attack! Enemy attack! As the search continued, many teams were attacked to varying degrees. Their methods were similar. They left after one attack, leaving a few corpses behind. I'd like to see how long you can struggle. The low-ranking officer did not suggest any changes to the current formation. He just kept urging the soldiers to move forward. Obviously, he wanted to use the advantage of numbers. He wanted to crush the opponent directly. The mountain peak was wide at the bottom and narrow at the top. As the search area gradually shrank, the distance between the soldiers also became smaller. Layer by layer, they formed a circle and kept climbing up. Bang! Enemy! The withered branches and rotten leaves under the feet of a group of soldiers suddenly exploded. A figure rushed up, and then a red thread pulled up, instantly knocking down 4 soldiers around it. Kill! The attack this time was right next to the low-ranking officer. He drew his saber without hesitation, swung it in the rain, and viciously slashed at the back of the figure. Ding! With a crisp sound of metal clashing, the saber was directly hit, and then a drop of blood fell toward the officer's throat. The officer was shocked, but his reaction was not slow. He quickly retreated and flipped backward. When the officer retreated to a safe distance, he saw that the 7 or 8 soldiers from before had been slaughtered. Looking at the surrounding soldiers flocking over, the black figure made a throat-slitting gesture at the officer, and then quickly retreated, disappearing into the rain. Continue chasing. The officer gritted his teeth and said. He did not believe that the other party had any tricks up his sleeve. It was just a dying struggle, but after saying that, he still took out a signal flare and threw it into the sky. The mountain peak here was high, so more people would see it. Bang! The blue light emitted a hazy light in the rain. After the signal flare was released, the search suddenly became much smoother. The sneaky figures did not appear anymore. At this time, more and more people gathered at the foot of the mountain. It seemed that all the surrounding soldiers had come here. Some people listened to the low-ranking officer and stood guard at the foot of the mountain. However, there were also people of the same rank as the officer who quickly rushed up. Obviously, they were also here for military merit. A quarter of an hour later. Haha, quick, quick! Seeing the top of the mountain in sight, the low-ranking officer shouted excitedly. Compared to the steep mountain, the top of the mountain was quite flat. There was a huge rock in the middle, and on one side there was a crooked towering ancient tree. Whoosh! The soldiers rushed in like a tide, but then their footsteps were a little hesitant. Because the death-like figure on the road was sitting on the huge rock at this time, quietly looking at them. Haha, there's no way to escape. The low-ranking officer walked out of the crowd. At this time, he saw the other party's appearance. The ordinary face had no sense of existence, the only feature was the long and narrow eyes. You're so slow, I've been waiting for you for a long time. Well, I like your slowness. The figure, Tangen shrugged and said casually. Waiting for us? Haha, want to surrender? The officer laughed twice and raised his head. But, unfortunately, we only need your body. The surrounding people have almost gathered. As if he did not hear the officer's words, Tang En said thoughtfully. What did you say? Is he crazy? The officer frowned, and then his heart moved. He glanced at the top of the mountain. Where are your companions? Aren't there more than a dozen people? They jumped off the cliff. Tang En stood up and bowed. Finally, thank you for the signal flare. Your mission is completed, you can die. Whoosh, as if crossing space, the figure directly came in front of the officer through the curtain of rain, followed by a red light pointed at the officer's forehead. Roar! The officer, who had been wary of Tang En, roared and raised his saber. Chi! The saber slid past the figure and cut it in half. Not good. The officer was not happy at all, because the saber did not feel any physical contact. A thought flashed through his mind, and his body suddenly retreated. You're too slow. With a sigh, the officer only felt a light in his eyes, and a dark metal blade suddenly appeared in front of him. It was said that when facing death, people's senses would be particularly sharp. The officer only felt that the rain suddenly became very slow, so slow that he could see each vertebral-shaped water droplet clearly. Then, he vaguely smelled a trace of blood on the blade, getting closer and closer, closer and closer. Puff! The dagger went straight between his eyebrows. The soldiers around him were dumbfounded. His figure quickly turned around, stepped on a huge rock, and leaped onto an ancient tree. Then, he jumped without hesitation, jumped off the cliff? The soldiers' brains were short-circuited by the events that happened in a few moments. "What's that?" a soldier who saw it suddenly asked. Following the direction of the finger, the soldiers saw the figure quickly glide in the air to another mountain peak. Although the downward trend was obvious, this was obviously not the route that a cliff jump should take. Quickly rushing to the edge of the cliff, the crowd realized that there was a green vine on the ancient tree that connected to the mountain peak below, but because of the obstruction of the tree and the curtain of rain, no one noticed. Under everyone's watchful eyes, the black figure became a small black dot and smoothly glided to the opposite mountain peak, jumped down, and seemed very relaxed. It seemed to be waving its hand in this direction. "If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation." Chapter 176. Let's go. Tang En cut the vines with his saber and turned around. The dozen or so members of the gray space beside him were a little dazed. It was always exciting to watch someone else do it. But when it was their turn, their legs turned to jelly, the rain gradually became heavier, and almost all the soldiers in the surroundings were lured to the steep mountain peak. In other words, Tang En and the others would be safe for at least the next hour. This chase had been going on for 2 days, and more soldiers were chasing after them. What was worse was that Tang En and the others' intention to go west had been guessed. Actually, it wasn't really guessed. After all, anyone who looked at the overall situation knew that there was only a slim chance of survival in the west. But guessing was one thing, and being able to block it was another. Tang En and the others had been running around aimlessly like ghosts for the past 2 days. They even went in the opposite direction a few times, messing up the formation of the soldiers who were chasing them. Of course, as time went by, the soldiers' advantage in numbers was gradually brought into play. They even caught up with them a few times, but they escaped in all kinds of strange ways every time. "Boss, where are we going now?" David asked as he carried Luke on his back. The battle had been intense in the past 2 days. Although the Gray Space Team hadn't lost any members, they had been injured. Luke, who wasn't good at close combat, was the most seriously injured. A saber had almost pierced through his abdomen. If they hadn't happened to find herbs that could stop the bleeding, they would have been listening to the gospel of the God of Light. "Northwest," Tang En said firmly without looking back. "Okay." Everyone nodded without the slightest doubt. In the past few days, they had thought that they were going to die for sure several times, but Tang En had always brought them out of danger in all kinds of ways. If they had obeyed Tang En because of his strength before, they were now blindly worshipping him. Tang En and the others didn't have a map and didn't know what was going on ahead, so they walked very casually. After walking northwest for about half an hour, they found a checkpoint that they had to pass. The checkpoint was no longer guarded by only 20 people like a few days ago. Now, each checkpoint was guarded by a platoon of nearly 100 people. Therefore, Tang En and the others changed their route again and headed north towards the dense forest. Compared to the steep mountainous terrain, the dense forest with piles of rotten leaves was more difficult to traverse and more dangerous. Not long after they entered the forest, Michaud's feet suddenly sank into the ground. Bang! Michaud's reaction was very fast. His body spun up, bringing up the scattered mud. "It's the swamp. Go around, I'll walk in front." Tang En did not choose to leave the forest. Such an environment was perfect for blocking a large number of pursuers. The forest was very humid, and now that it was raining, one could smell the rotten smell of moss and rotten wood everywhere. With such a terrain, swamps and the like were naturally common. No one dared to belittle nature's natural hazards. Tang En walked in front to clear the way. From time to time, he would activate his peeping glass, and his pupils would turn into almond-shaped shapes to scout the surrounding environment. "Boss!" David suddenly exclaimed. Tang En turned his head. The blade in his right hand flashed, and a lightning-fast red snake on the tree behind him was cut in half. I'm fine now, pack this up. We'll have snake meat for lunch." Rotten swamps, poisonous snakes, spotted spiders. The dense forest showed the intruders all kinds of local specialties and all kinds of indigenous people. Tang En had received special training in the forest, so he walked naturally and smoothly. In the eyes of the people behind him, it was as if the branches were consciously avoiding him, and did not obstruct him at all. Crack! Michaud stepped on a tree branch that was growing horizontally. He staggered and immediately steadied himself. "Michaud, why are you walking so strangely, like a girl?" David asked in surprise. Michaud rolled his eyes. "It's none of your business." Tang En, who was walking in front, curled his lips slightly and smiled. Of course, he knew why Michaud was like this. It could be said that as long as there were no accidents, Michaud would be the most successful member of the gray space. Michaud noticed that the reason why Twain was able to move so smoothly was because of his footstep. Tang En's footsteps were light and silent. When one foot was about to touch the ground, the other foot would quickly rise, and he seemed to be floating in the air. Of course, this was an illusion. Tang En was far from being able to float in the air. The reason for this was all due to his technique. Michaud was trying to imitate Luke's movements, so he stumbled a lot. Ha! Ha ha, a pheasant! David laughed wildly as he carried Luke on his back and rushed to the right. There was a pheasant with red feathers resting on top of a broken tree root. Probably because of the rain and the cold, the pheasant curled up and didn't move. "This foodie." Tang En shook his head. Then, he looked at the black soil and shouted anxiously, "David, don't move!" What's wrong?" David had already rushed to the tree root. He held Luke with one hand and quickly pinched the pheasant with the other. As soon as he said that, David's body suddenly sank, and a series of bubbles appeared on the black soil. Obviously, it was a huge swamp. "Damn it!" Tang En turned around and shouted, "Quick, pull the vines!" The swamp was too big. Tang En could go through it for a short time, but it was impossible for him to pull David and Luke out. After all, they were both heavy. "Boss, catch!" David shouted and raised his arms. Luke flew to the edge of the swamp. F***ck. Don't move. Because of their weight, the swamp was already up to David's knees. Now, because of his strength, the black soil reached his abdomen. David realized that he had done something stupid and hurriedly stopped moving, but the swamp slowly swallowed him up. "Boss!" Luke, who was caught, was pale. He pointed to the front and said, "I think there was a movement just now." Tang En was stunned. He looked over and saw that it was a floating field of rotten leaf. There didn't seem to be any movement. Frowning, his pupils instantly became almond-shaped, and he activated his peeping skill again. The lines of leaves, the lines of short wood and the vague lines of four-legged reptiles. They were hidden under the swamp and slowly slithered toward David. In this kind of environment it was obvious that they weren't anything good. F***ck. Tang En handed Luke to Michaud and rushed out like an arrow. Whoosh! At this time, a creature that arrived first suddenly jumped out. It was more than 10 feet long and had a black body. It opened its mouth wide and directly wanted to swallow David's head. "What is it?" David was shocked and reflexively punched. "Don't move." Bang! Tang En, who had rushed over, stepped on the creature's head and directly stomped it into the swamp. Then, he opened his arms and took advantage of the momentum to rise. Whoosh! 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 Several black shadows pounced on David from different directions. Empty kill. Twain's figure appeared in midair, and suddenly, 5 or 6 indistinguishable figures attacked in an instant. Hiss, hiss, hiss. More than 10 red lines crisscrossed around David, and the unknown creatures that pounced on him were directly cut into several pieces and thrown to the ground, their stinky blood sprinkling down. Gurgle, gurgle, gurgle. Like poking a beehive, the surrounding black swamp suddenly tumbled like boiling water. In Tang Yen's eyes, those were clearly creatures that slid over rapidly, and the scattered pieces of meat were also devoured by the creatures that arrived first. But this was far from enough, so more creatures rushed toward Tang Yen and David. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Black shadows jumped out one after another and pounced on them from all directions. Good timing! Tang Yen's figure flashed wildly, and in an instant, he circled around David a few times. There were afterimages everywhere, and it was as if more than 10 people had suddenly appeared. Then, dense red lines were pulled out one after another. The intelligence of these creatures was average, and they bit down when they saw the afterimages. Chi, chi, chi. Dark red blood gushed out like a fountain, and pieces of flesh of different sizes fell layer by layer. The black swamp around them suddenly turned into a river of blood, and the stench was nauseating. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The creatures around them went crazy. Some were busy devouring the corpses of their own kind, and more pounced on the red lines that were like a barrier. Boss, the vines are done. Harry, who was holding a large bundle of vines by the swamp, shouted because he could not see Tang Yen's figure. Throw it over. Flowers. Although it was not loud, it was very clear. In an instant, the red lines around them seemed to be swallowed by a black hole, and they gathered into something that looked like a nut core. Then, petals of different lengths of blood spread out, and enchanting flowers of blood gradually bloomed. Die! A blurry figure appeared and pushed out both arms. The flowers of blood shattered into a blade of light, and radiated in all directions. Whoosh, 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 bang, bang, bang. The creatures that pounced in the air exploded one after another. Pieces of flesh flew everywhere, and a mist of blood filled the air. The surroundings were cleared in an instant. Hurry up and throw it! Oh! Harry, who was shocked by the bloody scene, came back to his senses and threw the end of the vines over with great force. Tang Yen reacted quickly and caught it. At this moment, whoosh, there was a loud tumbling sound. Tang Yen turned around and his eyes widened. A 4-legged creature with a body like a small mountain was swimming over from the swamp in the distance. Those of the same kind who were fighting for the pieces of flesh could not avoid it and were directly crushed by it. F***ck, I hit the small one and the big one came out. Tang Yen hurriedly threw the vines to David. Hurry up and pull it. Bang. 10 people over there pulled together, and David was pulled out in an instant like a carrot. Whoosh. In the whistling sound, a black shadow covered the sky. The mountain-like creature had arrived. Perhaps because its body was too big to jump, it opened its bloody mouth and bit Tang Yen, who was in front of it. Tang Yen did not know how sharp the creature's teeth were, but the force of its bite was definitely not something he could withstand. He quickly leaped up, avoided the stinking big mouth, and landed on the creature's head. Then, he grabbed the dagger and stabbed it down. Ding! F***ck. Tang Yen looked at his arm that had been shaken off and was shocked. This was the meteorite iron essence that was known to be able to cut gold and jade. Boss, be careful, this is a swamp snake lizard. After David was pulled ashore, a voice sounded. Swamp snake lizard? What was that? Whoosh! Before Tang Yen could figure it out, there was a strong wind behind his head. He subconsciously rolled to the side. Boom! A thick and long tail hit the place where he was just now. Hiss! The giant beast called the swamp snake lizard let out a sorrowful cry. Its huge head was knocked forward by its own tail. F***ck. Tang Yen could not help but curse. Fortunately, he dodged quickly. Otherwise, he would not have been able to survive after being hit. The swamp snake lizard was in pain and seemed a little crazy. Its body suddenly turned sharply, trying to shake off Tang En. If there was no threat, Tang En would not be afraid to walk on the swamp. But now that there was this giant beast, he did not dare to fall. So, he ran wildly in the direction of the swamp snake lizard's rotation and stayed on top of it. Although the swamp snake lizard's body was much bigger, it obviously did not have any improvement in intelligence. Seeing that Tang En was still on it, it seemed to have forgotten the pain from last time and swung its tail again. Tang En did not hesitate to roll to the side. Boom! The swamp snake lizard hissed again. This is. Tang En, who had rolled and stood up, saw a lantern-like thing suddenly appear not far away from him. Slender brown beads were moving inside. Is this an eye? Tang En felt a chill in his heart. Did this thing grow up on hormones? How could it be so big? Since he had encountered it, Tang En would not be soft-hearted. He rushed forward and stabbed the blood ray dagger into the center of the lantern-like eye. F***ck, I don't believe that your eye can withstand the meteorite iron essence. Puff! Hiss! A deafening roar. The result was not out of Tang En's expectations. The dagger smoothly pierced into the center of the eye, and a large amount of red blood emerged. The swamp lizard went crazy. Its huge body miraculously bounced up and then fell into the swamp with a bang, crushing a group of small swamp lizards and splashing mud everywhere. Tang En was thrown out by the huge force of the swamp lizard and fell forward. Fortunately, it was the direction closest to the shore, so Tang En adjusted his body in the air and landed lightly on the swamp. Without waiting for his shoes to get wet, Tang En quickly slid forward and rushed forward on the quagmire as if he was skating on ice. Boss, be careful. Tang En turned his head and saw that the giant swamp lizard opened its bloody mouth and spat out a black cylindrical gas. The small swamp lizards along the way melted quickly in this gas, and not even their bones were left. They directly turned into nothingness. F***ck. Tang En's scalp tingled when he saw this. He quickly activated it. His originally swift figure suddenly turned into lightning and leaped to the edge of the swamp in a few breaths. Go, go! Amidst the shouts, a large group of people rushed through the dense forest in a sorry state. After chasing for 100 meters, the black pillar of gas finally fell apart, leaving behind a straight path that had been corroded into mud. Huff! Huff! I'm not running anymore. The swamp lizard, it won't come ashore. After sprinting for a few hundred meters, David leaned against a tree and gasped for breath. F***ck. Tang En swallowed. You bastard, you didn't even look at the situation when you caught a pheasant. I just wanted to eat beggar's chicken again. David looked very wronged and raised the trembling pheasant in his hand. Everyone was speechless. They had been sprinting all the way, and no one had noticed that the pheasant was still in David's hand. After a while, he roared, "Whoever makes beggar's chicken again is a **king coward. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation." Chapter 177. After the short and exciting trip to the swamp, Tang En and the others became more careful. In fact, the forest was not big, but who would have thought that there was such a fierce beast hidden in it? When it was noon, they set up wooden boards to block the rain and started a fire to eat a delicious roasted snake. David was unwilling to give up. He dug mud and wrapped the pheasant in it, wanting to eat the beggar's chicken again. However, because he didn't control the fire well, he found that the pheasant inside was completely burnt. In the end, he had no choice but to give it up. "How do you feel now?" Tang En handed a skewer of snake meat to Luke. "Thank you, boss. It's okay. I won't die." Luke took the snake meat with a pale face and took a big bite. "Well, hold on a little longer. When we break out of the encirclement, you'll be fine." Tang En patted him on the shoulder. It would be a lie to say that he was fine. Luke's wound had only stopped bleeding, but it didn't get better. Now that it was raining heavily, the wound could easily be infected. However, Tang En couldn't do anything during the escape. Now, he could only hope to break out of the encirclement as soon as possible and then recuperate for a while. Soon, they set off again. After that, there were no more accidents. After 2 hours, the trees gradually thinned out. It was obvious that they were about to leave the forest. At that moment, Tang En suddenly frowned. Then, he flashed and rushed to the edge of the forest. Boss, what's wrong?" After catching up, David opened his mouth and looked shocked. Then, the others followed and looked at the scene in front of them in silence. What appeared in front of Tang En and the others was a grassland. Under the misty rain, they couldn't see the end of the grassland in other directions. There was no doubt that such an unobstructed terrain was a disaster for them who were fleeing for their lives. "Boss, let's go back and change direction," David suggested. Tang En shook his head. "No, the peak could only delay them for 2 hours at most. But we've been walking in the forest for more than 4 hours. There's a high chance that we'll run into them when we go back. Then we keep moving forward." Tang En narrowed his eyes and exhaled. "Hiding is not a solution. We don't have a map, so this kind of thing will happen sooner or later." Having made up their minds, no one dared to waste any more time. He quickly stepped into the withered grassland and ran forward. The current situation was very obvious. If Tang En and the others could get out of sight before they were discovered, then everything would be fine. If they were discovered on the way, when the signal flare was fired, the surrounding soldiers would probably come from all directions of the grassland, and Tang En and the others would directly run into the encirclement while walking blindly. The current situation was already advantageous for Tang En and the others. In such a heavy rain, a person's vision range would definitely be reduced. As long as Tang En and the others could run for 10 miles, they would be able to escape. Basically, they would disappear from the sight of their pursuers. The team moved forward in silence. From time to time, there would be people looking back. It could be said that this was a race against fate. 3 miles, 5 miles, 8 miles, bang! A thunderous sound rang out in the distance. Everyone paused, as if the loud sound had exploded in their hearts. Right now, they really hoped that it was just thunder. But after being on the run for a few days, they could naturally tell that it was the sound of a signal flare exploding. Looking back, a brilliant blue light bloomed in the sky above the dense forest. Yes, it was so bright that it was a little dazzling. Phew! Tang En exhaled deeply and said decisively, "Quick, keep moving forward. David, let me carry Luke." Since they had been discovered, there was no better way. They could only bravely move forward and gamble on their luck to see if there would be soldiers ahead. Everyone ran wildly across the grassland, panting heavily. Every time they opened their mouths, they would gulp down a mouthful of rainwater. Tang En looked back and saw thousands of densely packed black dots surging out from the dense forest. At this moment, they were chasing after them all over the mountains and plains. After running at high speed for 2 hours, Luke, who was lying on his back, suddenly said, "There are people ahead." "How many?" "I can't see clearly." "Many." "Turn right." After a quick and short conversation, Tang En didn't hesitate at all and directly led everyone to the right. As for why right, well, the first reaction of people who weren't left-handed was usually to the right. Luke's eyesight, which was better than ordinary people's, played a huge role in this situation. Although they would still be discovered after walking for a while, at least they had the upper hand and wouldn't run into them. About 5 minutes later, Tang En and the others saw the group of people. The other party was a squadron of about 100 people. At that moment, the two sides were about 5 kilometers apart. The group of people had clearly seen Tang En and the others, and were now changing their direction and chasing after them. Tang En and the others were walking in a straight line, so if the group of people wanted to block them, they would have to move faster and cover a longer distance. Of course, this was if Tang En and the others could smoothly walk in a straight line. There are people on the right. Many. Luke, who was looking around, suddenly said, "Move left. Follow me." Tang En's expression didn't change at all as he quickly said. In an instant, the originally straight line turned 45 degrees to the left, which was slightly closer to the squadron of soldiers they had just encountered. At that moment, the advantage of moving first was obvious. Even if Tang En and the others were moving at the same speed as the soldiers, the 5 or 6 minutes lead was enough to prevent them from being directly surrounded. However, Tang En and the others' advantage quickly vanished into thin air. "On the right, there are a lot of people," Luke said with difficulty. At that moment, he suddenly hated himself for having better eyesight than the others. "Move left again." Tang En's tone was as calm as ever as he led the dozen or so people in a different direction. At that moment, the advantage lay with the soldiers. If Tang En and the others weren't faster than the other party, they would be surrounded from both sides. "Boss." David, who was running, suddenly called out. "HM?" Tang En turned around. "Take Luke and Michaud and leave. If we weren't holding you back, you would definitely be able to break through with your speed." David spat out a mouthful of rainwater. This was the truth. If Tang En used his absolute speed, even with Luke on his back, he would still be able to leave the soldiers in the dust. Michaud's speed wasn't as exaggerated, but if he used his full strength, he would still be able to break through. "Yes, boss, you guys should go." "Boss, don't worry about us. Let's go." Everyone was shouting the same thing. They were all trying to persuade Tang En and the others to leave on their own. "Shut the F***ck up. F***ck. I'm so touched. So, you guys are F***king heroes. I'm a F***king deserter. Listen up, I'm your F***king captain. Since I F***king brought you guys out, I'll F***king bring you back. If anyone dares to stop now, I'll be the first to kill him. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation." Chapter 178. If anyone dares to stop now, I'll be the first to kill him. Tang En's eyes glinted coldly as he mocked them. "Instead of letting your so-called heroes die, I might as well spend some effort and send you cowards on your way." Everyone couldn't help but lower their heads when they saw how furious Tang En was. "Remember this forever. If you want to die, get the hell away from me. Don't let me see you die. Now, start running. Do you hear me?" "Yes." "Louder. You're not dead yet." Tang En roared. I heard it. In the torrential rain, everyone opened their mouths wide and let out guttural roars. "Very good." As they ran, bean-sized raindrops pelted their faces like hailstones. In such an environment, it was basically impossible to keep one's eyes open. The slightest distraction could result in them going astray. If it were any other time, it wouldn't matter if they went astray. At worst, they could just run a little longer and come back. However, it was a critical moment where every second mattered. If they took a wrong turn, they would be surrounded and the entire team would be wiped out. As far as Luke could see, all 3 teams were running toward the same location. Tang En roughly estimated that the location was about 5 to 6 miles away from them, and might be closer to the pursuers. What they needed to do now was to increase their speed and rush out before the 2 teams of soldiers closed the door. "Throw away your plate armor and run at full speed." "Yes, sir." Everyone quickly responded. As they ran, they took off their breastplates, gauntlets, and greaves. Now that they were lighter, their speed increased a little more. This time, their run was smoother. They didn't see any other teams ahead of them. On the other side, however, soldiers flashed through the rain every now and then. 5 kilometers, 4 kilometers, 3 kilometers, 2 kilometers, both sides appeared clearly in each other's line of sight. Those with good eyesight could even see what the person in front of them looked like. 500 meters, 400 meters, 300 meters, 200 meters. As they got closer, Tang Yin could even hear the heavy breathing of the soldiers on both sides. Stop. Who stop and we'll spare your lives. If you keep running, we'll shoot arrows. Kill them. Some were threatening the enemy fiercely, some were pretending to lure the enemy. All kinds of voices came from both sides. This was a psychological battle. After Tang Yin and the others abandoned their equipment, they finally caught up. Now, the three teams were almost the same distance away from the location. Under such circumstances, if he couldn't withstand the pressure, or if he hesitated, it was very likely that the situation would change. This kind of voice naturally had no effect on Tang Yin, whose hands were stained with blood, and who had a firm will. The team members behind him saw that Tang Yin didn't seem to care about him at all. They just kept running forward without a care. 100 meters. **T. Tang Yin narrowed his eyes and stared at the middle of the two groups of soldiers. Changing directions midway still affected their chances of escaping. If they just ran like this, the few people in front would be able to break through, but if they fell behind, the slower members would be entangled. Tang Yin shouted decisively, "David." "Boss?" David's stamina was pretty good, so he kept following behind him. "Catch Luke and lead everyone out of here." After that, before David could react, Luke was gently tossed over to him. David subconsciously caught Luke and his face changed. "Boss, shut your crow's beak. I won't die." Twain shouted to shut David's mouth. The latter sentence was an explanation. After saying that, Tang Yin paused in his footsteps and instantly fell to the back of the group. The one running at the back was Harry. This little fatty with a lot of fat on his body was running so hard that he was out of breath. It really made people worry that he would pass out in the next second. 50 meters, haha, phew. You can't run, phew. As the distance closed, the soldiers on both sides estimated that they could block at least half of the members of the gray space. 30 meters, hee, is that so? Tang Yin flicked his wrist and took out a dagger. 10 meters. Prepare to attack. The soldiers raised their spears and roared as they made their final charge. Huh! Suddenly, some of the soldiers were stunned. This kind of charge was naturally aimed at people, but one person actually disappeared from their sight. Hiss, hiss, hiss. Suddenly, there was a slight sound of wind in the rainstorm, and then the curtain of rain in that place seemed to be affected by some kind of force and spun to the side. Then, red ripples appeared faintly. Charge! David roared as he carried Luke on his back and rushed forward under the eyes of the soldiers on both sides. Another figure was faster than him, and he jumped out of the crowd like a bolt of lightning. It was Michaud. He was the first one to break out of the encirclement, but after he rushed out, he slowed down and couldn't help but turn his head to look back. At that moment, David rushed out with Luke on his back, and two other members also ran out before the weapons reached them. After that, there was no after. The closest member was still in the middle of the encirclement. Run! David didn't stop and shouted, "Boss will get them out." These people had just run out of the encirclement, and were far from out of danger. At that moment, the members of the gray space had already stopped. They gripped their short swords tightly and looked around fiercely. At that moment, they only thought that they had no way out and wanted to kill someone with their lives. Suddenly, hiss, 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 at the back of the group, the red ripples gradually increased and rotated around a point at a uniform speed. Soon, the curtain of rain around them became wider and wider, and a small red whirlwind was formed. "Get out of the way!" A faint voice came from the whirlwind. Harry subconsciously leaned to the side, and the small whirlwind swept past in an instant. In the blink of an eye, it was in front of the group, which was the center of the encirclement. "What is that?" "Kill them!" The red whirlwind was so conspicuous that the soldiers at the front naturally saw it. However, the people behind them rushed forward one after another, and they had no choice but to passively send their spears forward. Whoosh, 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 the spears stabbed at the center from all directions. Storm! Swish, 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 the red whirlwind suddenly expanded, and the rain curtain was thrown out in long lines. The soldiers felt a sharp pain in their hands, and their spears were shaken out of their hands. Then, their bodies were pushed forward by the force from behind. Explode, explode, explode. Amidst the continuous explosions, the narrow space instantly changed color, and the rain was completely covered by blood. The soldiers who rushed forward were directly swept up by the whirlwind, swallowed, cut, and exploded. The soldiers at the back only felt their vision turn red, and they were completely drenched in blood. Then, their weapons were taken away, and their bodies leaned forward. Ah! Help! Devil! Screams, wails, cries for help, screams of terror. It was as if a door to hell had opened in the middle of the field, and all kinds of sorrowful cries could be heard. The soldiers at the back could not see the situation clearly, but they were immediately hit by all kinds of flying things. This was a soldier holding a head, a soldier holding an eyeball, a soldier holding a thigh. God! Retreat! Amidst the cries of alarm, the tide-like soldiers suddenly paused. Some soldiers with quick reactions turned their heads and wanted to run back. However, it was impossible for the crowd to stop immediately, so the bloody scene was still playing out. Run! The ethereal voice rang out again. The members of the gray space behind him were also dumbfounded. Although the whirlwind intentionally avoided them, the blood and severed limbs would still roll over. They were also close to the whirlwind, so now they were all covered in blood. Damn it, what are you standing there for? Run! In a short period of time, the speed of the red whirlwind had slowed down, and sometimes it even stopped. Oh! Everyone seemed to wake up from a dream, and quickly ran away from the side where the whirlwind had stopped. At this time, if the soldiers who were running away turned around and stabbed with their spears, they could still make the crowd stay, but at this time they were all scared out of their wits, and were afraid that they could not run fast enough, so they did not think of attacking. After the members of the gray space ran away, the red whirlwind suddenly expanded again, as if to expand the swallowing area. This movement made the soldiers tremble in fear, and they screamed and ran away. At this time, the direction of the crowd had completely changed. Of course, among them, there were careless people who fell, and before they could get up, they were immediately trampled by several people. Boom! At this time, the skyrocketing whirlwind suddenly exploded, and a blood-red figure was directly thrown out. Puff! The figure in the air suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood, and then with a bang, fell heavily to the ground, and immediately spat out another mouthful of blood. Needless to say, this person was Tang En. At this time, he felt that his brain was buzzing, and his eyes were sometimes clear and sometimes blurry. The scene he saw was very distorted and very abstract. The storm was not that easy to use, and he was only at the beginner stage now, so he could not withstand so many attacks. While the whirlwind was slaughtering the soldiers on the outside, it was also ravaging his body on the inside. Boss, boss! A figure rolled over like a gust of wind. Tang En shook his head and responded unconsciously. Then he felt that he was being helped up, and then his vision turned black. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 179. In the evening, the rain had stopped. There were still traces of the storm on the leaves, and from time to time, drops of water would slide down the veins of the broad leaves and fall into the puddles, making a crisp sound like a string being plucked. Although this kind of sound rose and fell one after another, it made the small forest in the mountain range even more quiet. Some small creatures took advantage of this time to come out. A four-legged snake poked its head out of the cave and slowly crawled to a bush. That was where it hunted. After the rain, there were a lot of small insects. It wanted to take the opportunity to eat a full meal before going back to sleep. However, when it crawled over, it found that the bush was already occupied. Oh, it was a creature called a human. The four-legged snake happily stuck out its tongue. It didn't mind occasionally changing its taste. After all, humans were much more fleshy than mosquitoes. Of course, it usually wouldn't provoke such a creature because it was very dangerous. However, at this time, the human was motionless, as if he was sleeping. The naturally cold-blooded four-legged snake couldn't resist the temptation of warm meat, so it began to slowly approach the human. Decayed leaves, dead wood. Creeping noiselessly, closer, closer and closer, suddenly, a hissing sound could be heard. With a flash of the blade, the sleeping human flicked his wrist, and a pitch-black dagger fell from the sky. With a thud, it nailed the gluttonous four-legged snake to the ground. The four-legged snake screamed and struggled under the dagger. However, it was all in vain. Gradually, its small claws stopped moving. "Hey boss, you're awake?" A surprised voice sounded as a big man walked over from the bushes. "Boss, you're awake?" Another young man with a feminine face walked over and observed for a while. "Please, David. You're still in the mood to joke at this time?" David scratched his head and said a little awkwardly, "I heard a sound. Look, boss's dagger is out." "Oh, it's true." The young man with a feminine face leaned over and looked at the snake that was nailed to the ground. Then, he asked in confusion, "Why isn't boss awake yet?" "How would I know?" Michaud, do you think boss is pretending to be asleep?" Michaud couldn't help but roll his eyes. "David, not everyone is as boring as you." "Oh, hee." David grinned, revealing a simple, honest, yes, silly smile. "All right, carry boss on your back and let's go. The pursuers might be catching up soon." "They still dare to come? Don't you think you've been killed enough by boss?" David curled his lips in disdain. "That's enough." Michaud's expression was complicated, as if he had recalled something. His body trembled, and then he said helplessly, "But then the boss fainted. They all saw it." "Humph, boss will wake up." David snorted. "Let's see if they still dare to chase after us." After saying that, he reached out to help the person on the ground up and carried him on his back. Suddenly, David's body trembled as he cried out in surprise, "Boss, you're awake!" "David, you're doing it again." Michaud frowned. "Water, water, Michaud's mouth fell open. "Boss is awake." "Water, water, who? Water? Oh, boss, wait a moment." Because it was right beside his ear, David quickly confirmed his words. He then put her down and quickly ran to a broad-leaved tree to collect the water droplets on it. A moment later, a pool of water dripped down the leaves and into his mouth. Tang En gradually woke up when he felt the cold on his lip. When he opened his eyes, there was no foredrip, no uniformed nurse. Only a huge head covered his eyes. He blinked. "This is, boss, it's me, David. It's over." David's face was full of anxiety as he stretched out his index finger. "Boss, what's this? F***CK, take your hand away." Tang En completely came back to his senses and said gloomily, "Who would recognize you if you were so close?" "Boss, you're finally awake." "Boss," in an instant, a dozen members of the gray space surrounded him. They were all very happy and excited. Tang En glanced at them one by one and said their names silently in his heart. Then, he heaved a sigh of relief. "Good, everyone's here. Where's Luke?" "Boss, I'm here." Luke walked over with a pale face, clutching his abdomen. "Okay, it's good that you're all here. It's good that you're all here." Tang En nodded and then looked around his body. He was finally completely relieved. Fortunately, all the parts were still there. Storm was very effective in killing enemies, but at the same time, it hurt him a lot. Before he fully mastered it, it was a double-edged sword. "What's the situation now? Aren't we on the grassland?" Tang En looked around and asked. David replied, "Boss, you've been unconscious for a day. We left the grassland this morning and are still being hunted, but there's good news. Unconscious for a day? Good news? The scattered information gradually gathered. While Tang En was unconscious, the members of the gray space continued to flee. The good news David was talking about was that they hadn't seen a single checkpoint after walking for a long time. It seemed that they had broken out of the encirclement. However, the current situation wasn't optimistic. The pursuers weren't far behind them. But perhaps they were shocked by Tang En's bloody methods on the grassland, so they didn't launch an attack for the time being. Tang En's injuries were still quite serious. After learning some simple information and confirming that he wouldn't be in any danger for the time being, he ate something and fell asleep again. The members of the gray space began to flee out of habit again. Because they had broken out of the encirclement, they didn't need to pay attention to their direction. What they needed to do now was to get rid of the pursuers behind them. When Tang En woke up again, it was already late at night. He was lying on a simple stretcher. The trees around him kept falling back, and unknown insects in the distance were singing in a low voice, phew. Exhaling softly, Tang En began to thoroughly examine his injuries. He moved his right hand. Yes, his forearm was sore in many places, and some parts were itchy. That was because his abnormal physique was constantly healing, but his right hand probably wouldn't be able to wield a sword for the time being. His left hand was much better. He clenched his fist and found that the injury wasn't serious. As for his body, there were a lot of itchy places. If he moved a little, he would feel a piercing pain. These were only external injuries. From the blood he spat out, it was obvious that his internal organs were also badly shaken. Fortunately, blood qi was different from fighting qi. It didn't need to go through those places. Boss, you're awake. At the end of the stretcher was Michaud. He saw Tang En constantly twisting his body. How do you feel now? I'm fine. Well, are those soldiers still chasing us? Yes, we just looked at them when we passed by the hill. They are about 3 or 4 miles behind us. There are about 300 of them. I don't know how many are behind them. Tang En nodded to show that he understood. The situation was not good. The deterrence wouldn't last long. At most, he could wait until tomorrow. Those soldiers would definitely launch a tentative attack. If he didn't fight then, the next thing would be an endless siege. When we rest later, find a higher mountain. Without a map, they could only stand on a high place and rely on their naked eyes to see if there was a chance to escape. Yes, now that the two sides were so close, and the soldiers didn't want to launch an attack immediately, there was no need to chase them day and night. When Tang En and the others found a place to stop, the soldiers sent people to observe and then set up camp not far away. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.